Welcome to another exciting episode of the Collect and Destroy podcast. I am your host, the Baxter of Puppets. Birmingham, England, 1968, an industrial wasteland of working class struggle, toiling day in and day out. Every day is exactly the same. Yet 4 young men are looking to escape this hard life of factory work through their love of music. What happens next changes the world forever and shapes the lives of people everywhere, including my guest today and myself. This very podcast may not be here today if it were not for the creation of heavy metal by Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, Bill Ward, and Ozzy Osbourne all that many years ago. We are here today to worship at the altar of the riff masters, the doom bringers, the ones we owe an endless debt of gratitude, the mighty and powerful Black Sabbath. My special guest today joins me once again from sunny California. He's Hoffman, Hoff Machine, Ken Hoffman. Welcome to the show.
Baxter of Puppets, thank you once again for having me. I don't think I can express in words how excited I am to discuss Black Sabbath. When you and I first started talking about doing this podcast, that was the first thing we said. Black Sabbath, we got to do a Sabbath podcast. What are we at? What episode are we on now? 16? 16. Here we are. Finally, I am amped.
All is right in the world, brother. The Milwaukee Bucks are world champions.
Congratulations. I meant to text you, but, I don't really give a shit about basketball, so whatever. But
Aaron Rodgers is back with the Green Bay Packers.
I was going to text you, but I don't give a shit about Aaron Rodgers either.
And we're doing a Black Sabbath podcast.
But I do give a shit about Black Sabbath, so I have been texting you about Black Sabbath. But yes, congratulations on your Bucks. Congratulations on Rodgers returning. That's where he needs to be, where he belongs. So all is right in the universe because here we are today to talk about the Godfathers of Metal.
So before we start talking Sabbath, let's catch up a little bit. Yeah, I've been seeing that you have been making some pretty awesome vintage book purchases lately. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think it started somehow. You and I were talking about the Warrens, the paranormal investigators, and their first case were one of their first cases when the Andyville horror, and you told me that was like one of your favorite books or something, and I had never read it.
Yeah, so good.
I do have some horror books. I mean, about my King collection, but I do have some pretty good horror books, classic horror books in my collection. One of which is The Exorcist, hardcover first edition that I've never read either. So I bought Andyville on eBay, read The Exorcist first, ripped through that, loved it. It was great. Then watched the movie. I'm about 3/4 or a little bit more than almost done with Andyville right now. And then I'm going to watch that movie. And then I also just got Rosemary's Baby and The Omen. So I'm kind of like on this 60s, 70s vintage horror novel turned movie kick. So I can watch, so I can read the books and then compare the movies to them and, sort of rediscover the classics that way.
Yeah, Amityville, one of my favorite books. I've recollections of like family vacation, laying down in the back of the car, reading it, listening to Nine Inch Nails Further Down the Spiral, which was like a really good soundtrack to the spooky book. And also, you should check out the Ryan Reynolds Amityville horror movie as well.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good.
Okay.
And then Twisted were on the last podcast. I believe that they recommended Amityville 3.
That was funny. Yeah, that when I was listening to that and I heard that, and that's I guess all these things sort of combined made me say, you know what, let me get into Amityville real quick here and see what's happening, because I don't think I've seen the first movie, the original, but I've never seen like the rest of the franchise. So that was like his favorite horror movie, I think, was your question on that. And I was like, really, that's your answer? So I'm like, all right, let me dive deep here. If Twisted says it's good, then it's got to be good,
Well, so. And that was a Warren's case as well. So interestingly enough, and then I was reading some stuff online. There was some question of like, should they make a Warren film, a Conjuring series film that is essentially a Amityville film. And I know they
Mhm.
kind of already like put a little bit of it into the other movie. So
Right.
maybe they don't need to go into that territory, but cool roots. And like I've said before on other podcasts, living where the Warrens were, it's
Right.
like really cool to be here, just the
Mhm.
same way as it's really cool to read Stephen King while I'm living in this area.
For
Like,
sure. Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. So that's kind of like a fun, just little deep dive that I'm doing right now. That just
Yeah.
kind of came out of nowhere, really, because you gave me a couple little things to focus on, and that's how it starts.
So what else you been up to?
Just plugging away, man. We've been, typical summer stuff. We're taking little trips here and there. Here's a fun little story. We went up to Seattle to see Tip's parents, Jacob's grandparents, my in-laws, and they're up, in NorCal. That's like a 14-hour drive or 12-hour drive. So we're like, let's make a detour and go up through Mendocino, Humboldt County, because I was watching some trailers, some horror movies, and the trailers came on before. And there was this movie for Willow Creek. And I'm like, what's this? Willow Creek, as it turns out, is the town where the original Bigfoot video was filmed. Like the famous clip of the Bigfoot walking through the woods and he turns and looks at the camera. I didn't know that was filmed in Humboldt County, California. I thought that was somewhere in Oregon or Washington. I never really knew it. But then I saw this movie trailer that said Willow Creek. That was directed by Bobcat Goldthwait. His first venture into horror, and it was like a found footage, Blair Witch style, paranormal, and whatever that movie is, found footage style shooting, and it was all about the Bigfoot story, and so it got me fired up. I looked up Willow Creek. I saw it was in Humboldt. I'm like, let's make a detour to Willow Creek, and stop in there, and we'll go. There's a museum. There's like a Bigfoot burger at the local Greasy Spoon where the bun is shaped like a foot. I'm like, this is a cool thing. My son and I are like super into Godzilla and King Kong and Bigfoot and all that stuff right now. So I bought us some shirts. I planned this for like a year, dude. A year. Last weekend we drive up there, and it's a 4-hour detour out of the way through the woods, no cell phone reception, windy turns. Jacob gets car sick when the roads are windy and the elevation is high. So he's complaining. Everybody's miserable. It's 105 degrees. There's no cell phone reception. Finally, we pull into Willow Creek. I'm like, dude, we're here. We're at the home of Bigfoot. We stop at the gas station where there's a sculpture, there's like kind of statues and Bigfoot shit all over the town. The whole town is like centered around Bigfoot because there's nothing else there, right? We pull up to the museum. I'm like, we're here, dude. I walk up to the door, closed Mondays and Tuesdays. It's Monday. I'm like, it's my Wally World moment, dude. It's my Clark Griswold moment. I'm like, oh my God. Now I've been staring at this website for weeks, planning Airbnbs and hotels. How do I not see that it's closed, right?
4 hours out of your way.
I'm freaking out, dude. I'm like, this is going to go down as the worst vacation ever. I'm like, how do I break into this house? There is a huge statue of Bigfoot, like a huge carving. I'm like, okay, well, let's go at least take our picture in front of the giant Bigfoot. Pest control pulls up, and he sprays the whole thing with like pesticide right before we're about to take a photo of the damn thing. This photo on screen right now is the one at the gas station. There's another photo where we're in front of the museum. That's it. He sprays the whole damn thing with pesticide right before we're about to take the photo. I'm like, great. Now we're going to get cancer. I'm super pissed off. So I'm like, well, let's go get the Bigfoot burger, the Greasy Spoon. I looked that up. The cafe also closed on Monday and Tuesday. I'm like, I can't even get a goddamn Bigfoot burger while I'm here in Bigfootville, So we go to this place called the Bigfoot Steakhouse, and it's terrible, but we go in there and we eat some lunch. And I look on the website. I'm like, how could I have missed this? I look on the website. It clearly says closed Monday and Tuesday. I'm the worst dad in the world at this point. And then I see it's like, hey, if you want a personal tour, give a call 24 hours in advance. Maybe we can accommodate you. So by chance, I call them up and I get their voicemail. I'm like, dude, help a brother out here. I'm a loser dad. Just drove 5 hours and you're closed. Please don't let me disappoint my family and have the worst vacation in history. Give me a call back if you can accommodate us. No answer. We finished our lunch. And now, we had been driving inland towards the coast. And then to go back up to Seattle, we had to go back out and not go coastal. But the turn was right in front of the Bigfoot Museum. So we actually continued on the road that we were on. We didn't backtrack. So about 10 miles up the road, the GPS switches and it's like 4.5 hours. And I'm like, no, we're supposed to be like 3 hours, 45 minutes away. What happened? We realized we're going in the wrong direction. No cell phone reception. The GPS is all whack. So I'm like, turn around. Let's go back. We turn around. As we're coming back into town, I get cell phone reception. My voicemail pings, and it's the museum. And she's like, and the woman's like, hey, I got your message. I'm here doing paperwork. If you want to come in, but in the next 45 minutes, let me know and I'll let you guys in. I'm like, oh my God, save that, call her back. I'm like, I'll be there in 3 minutes. Boom. We pull in, we get a personal tour of the Bigfoot Museum, like trip salvage, dude. It was pretty cool. Somehow miraculously, I wasn't the biggest loser dad in the world. And I didn't end up regretting that and hating myself forever. But it was, a neat experience. The Bigfoot Museum is pretty dope, even though it's just a dumb little room in the back of a building. But to think about the urban myth that is Bigfoot, how huge it is, all sort of starting in this town and being able to see it and see the original footprint casts and all the memorabilia and everything assembled under one roof. It was pretty cool, man. I like that kind of, spooky urban myth, urban legend kind of thing. So, and Jacob had a really good time.
Even from a hokey American, what do you call it? Roadside attraction.
Sure.
When we took our road trip, I found there's a roadside attraction website, and you can go down the roads and see what you're going to go by. We went by the statue of Liber-Frog, which is literally a Statue of Liberty statue in the middle of a garden that looks like the Statue of Liberty, but it's a frog.
Okay. It's a frog.
Those weird things, you're not going to go out of your way necessarily.
Yeah.
And I know you went 4 hours out of your way, but how many people are going to get a chance to go to that place? So it's just cool to be able to experience something that very few will make the trek out.
And it's just it's Americana, you know what I mean? And very, very few people I think would ever really see that unless you live in that area. And trust me, you don't want to live in that area. It's just there's nothing there. It's a beautiful part of the country. It's just you can see why Bigfoot would live there and prosper there, because it's just thick, dense, forest. Surround and it just runs a river for 200 miles with no cell phone. So it feels, like you're in vintage America. It's really a beautiful trip, but most people are not going to ever really see that. So to be able to experience that and have some cool photos and now have a much better story than just driving out there and seeing it.
Yeah.
So, if I implore people, if anything ever goes south, pick up the phone and make a phone call. You know what I mean? You'd be surprised. Now everyone's everything's email and tech. And so pick up the phone occasionally and try to communicate with another human being. You'd be surprised what you can accomplish if you do that, So somebody heard my message and responded.
So a few things that I want to talk about are some things that I've been watching. I believe you kind of been tuning into this as well. The Masters of the Universe Revelation series on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
It's a direct sequel to the original Filmation series from the 80s. Different visual style, though, more of an anime stylized, more realistic, I guess you might say. Rendition helmed by Kevin Smith. Of Clerks, Mallrats fame, Jay and Silent Bob, obviously. I enjoyed this a lot. I won't release any spoilers for those who haven't checked it out yet. But as a child of the 80s, I thought it was pretty cool to see the characters that I grew up presented on the screen. Not much different from what I was accustomed to as a kid. Maybe a little less hokey, a little less comedic.
It's certainly a little. This was a spin of a little bit more mature and more serious. I think you and I were talking about it, and I got another buddy who's a big He-Man guy was telling me about it, and my interest was certainly peaked, and I'm like halfway through the series right now. I'm like, Kevin Smith's going to do a great job of this. I think it's a cool spin. I won't give any spoilers, other than the fact that the animation, like you said, is different, and there's a lot of other focus on other characters. So
Yeah.
My verdict isn't set yet because I haven't finished it, but everything old is new is cool. So like to get a different perspective on it, I think is pretty neat. And so far I'm enjoying it. And hopefully, I know there's been a lot of criticisms online about it, sort of like the purists of He-Man. So it may or may not get renewed. I hope that it does so that the story will continue.
Yeah, I think that people's criticisms are relying on the fact that this is the only thing we've gotten. And
Yeah.
I watched this all in one sitting. So for me, it was like just like sitting down and watching one really long episode of a series.
Right.
Because it's not like the classic He-Man where every episode was a different story. This is one, it's basically like a movie, right? Like a long movie. And it sounds good. It visually looks good. I like that they brought the toys into it.
Yep.
Like the vehicles they're riding on are the toys that you had when you were a kid, or you wished you had because maybe you just had one of the 10 vehicles. Because believe it or not, kids,
interesting mix of like sci-fi and like Conan, So
yes.
you get this like really primitive and then really futuristic,
Yep.
mashup. It gave me an excuse to introduce He-Man to Jacob because he didn't know it. So we've been watching the old school He-Mans on YouTube, which when I watch him with him, and then to see him like literally after 2 episodes, Jacob's going around the house. He's like, do, 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 do. I'm like, dude, you just picked up that right away, man. Which I love to see him, experience and enjoy the things that I did. There's a whole bunch of shit that's new for him that he likes, and I'm like, oh God, these things are terrible today. But to watch him, relive the classics that I did, it's like watching me, and today was his first day at kindergarten, dude. I dropped him off at kindergarten. So it was like, I've got all this like past self-reflective shit going on right now. And it's really neat to be able to kind of experience the world again through his eyes, but experience my things through his eyes and relive them with him. And He-Man is one of them. And my buddy sent me like the new He-Man action figures, which they re-released. And I think they're like pretty close to the vintage ones, but like with some upgrades right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's two lines right now. There's the Origins line, which is just like what we remember from being kids. And some of those characters even are a little bit more realistic to the cartoon when we were kids.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of the toys were created before the cartoon was created. So they made some tweaks to the characters. So when you get the new toy line now, they're a little more, it's like how you remember it from the show. Yeah. The second toy line is the characters from the Netflix show, which are more of that like elongated, stylized treatment. I honestly am a big fan of the originals, and then I like the Origins figures. I've pre-ordered every single one of them.
He sent me He-Man and Skeletor. I like how the swords come together to create like the power sword or whatever it's called, and it's cool, man. I love being able to relive it, man.
Another thing that I've been watching in the similar vein is the Transformers War for Cybertron trilogy on Netflix, which is 3 6-episode parts. And kind of the same thing, except instead of it being a sequel, this is a prequel to the original cartoon. It's cool because it kind of makes a lot of things canon. They have the characters from the Beast Wars cartoon from the 90s. Mm-hmm. They kind of intertwine all the stories, connect things from the 86 film. It just feels right. It just feels like the characters look like they're supposed to. I'm very much not a fan of any of the Michael Bay live action Transformers stuff.
Really? I think they're pretty cool.
I just think they did a great disservice to the source material, but I want them to look, they did a better job in the Bumblebee film. But like, you don't need to put freaking flames on Optimus Prime. Like you don't like the whole over the top robot looks of them. I want the characters from the original series. Like I want the stuff to look like that. So This is like more of like a computer animation style, but again, probably for a little bit more mature audiences versus the original. But that's because they're catering to all ages on this. They're catering to us as the kids that watched it originally.
Right. I haven't seen any of these, but I do like Transformers. Jacob likes them. There's different versions of them now, like called Power Bots, I think. So Jacob
the rescue bots they have.
Rescue Bots. So he has these little ones he's super into them. Is Optimus Prime voiced by Peter Cullen in this series?
Yep, Peter Cullen is involved. Frank Welker, who did original Megatron voice.
Right. And so there's some synergies to the original there. Dude, Optimus Prime, Peter Cullen's voice, like there's like James Earl Jones, and then there's like Peter Cullen when it comes to like voiceover guys, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like Darth Vader and Optimus Prime are like the two most recognizable voices in like, coming out of the 80s,
I've found as an adult now, I've been learning a lot more about the voiceover actors. And like one that I met was Mark Dodson. Okay. And Mark Dodson's known for doing Salacious Crumb. He did the Gremlins and Gremlins 2. I met him at the Rhode Island Comic-Con, just like the nicest guy. He did the little Salacious Crumb laugh from Star Wars. And you start Wikipedia in these guys, like Frank Welker, he did Scooby-Doo, Fred from Scooby-Doo. He did all these characters and you're like, wow. And then he did like 8 of the Transformers voices.
Right.
Or even Talking Masters, like the Masters of the Universe. One voice actor did like 10 of the characters. And there's a reason why every time there's a wizard that shows up in Masters of the Universe, it's the same voice.
Right. And you get to sort of appreciate their skill and their diversity, you know what I mean, in their characters, like the range they can do. It's a pretty impressive skill to have it, I think, and a talent.
Well, and the impact that they had on us, like without ever seeing their face or knowing their name.
Right.
You're like, you contributed to so much of my childhood and so much of my joy in my life. And the fact that they're still alive.
Did you ever see like any of the YouTube videos of like the original recordings of Star Wars where the actor inside Darth Vader is speaking the lines because he's acting out the scenes, and when you hear like the actor's voice, it like makes no sense. And I think that I read somewhere that whoever was playing him, I don't know who the actor was that was in the costume, was pretty upset that he didn't get to voice Darth Vader. And I was like, dude, listen to you,
There's an excellent documentary about him.
Oh, really?
He actually just his name is David Prowse.
Okay.
And he recently passed away. And there was not a good relationship between him and Lucasfilm because he was very misled into believing that he would be voicing the character.
Oh, all right.
And then they went and they overdubbed. So he goes to the theater to see himself on the big screen, and they have replaced all of his lines.
He didn't even know until the release.
I don't think so. I'm not sure, but he wasn't even allowed to do until his death. He wasn't allowed to do the Star Wars celebrations. He really didn't get the credit for being the actor in the suit.
Truly, because I didn't know what his name was.
Yeah. So. But yeah, I forget what the documentary is, but just Google David Prowse. I think it's on Netflix. Yeah. Excellent movie. It might be the same doc that also covers a lot of the people that were in costumes in Star Wars, and you get to hear a lot of the behind the scenes stories. And
right.
So the last little bit before we get into things is this is officially the final podcast that will be broadcasting from this location.
I was like, what is this graphic here on the screen? Did you draw this, or did you get something? Did you find this somewhere?
I put that together.
That's a little Iron Maiden, little Eddie unpacking. That's awesome. That's a great illustration.
So in a few weeks I will be closing on a new property, which means that the Collect and Destroy podcast studio will officially be moving and relaunching. So we don't have a return date yet for episodes, so there'll be a little bit of a break here after Black Sabbath, which we may need after today's episode. But it'll be bigger and better things, and excited to have some even just from a technology side, have some better internet and stuff like that.
Well, congratulations on the closing of your house and the relocation. That's very, very exciting stuff.
All right. So let's get started. You ready?
Let's get started. I am ready, dude.
You ready to dive in? All right.
I'm so ready.
As I previously mentioned, Black Sabbath were an English rock band formed in Birmingham in 1968 and are undeniably cited as the fathers of heavy metal music.
Yes,
the band was formed by guitarist Tony Iommi, drummer Bill Ward, bassist Geezer Butler, and a vocalist you may have heard of, little guy named Ozzy Osbourne.
Ozzy.
And this is considered the band's classic lineup. Later on, we'll tackle the various lineup changes following Osbourne's departure in 1979, with Iommi being the only constant member. And of course, the band's second most important version, that being fronted by the legendary Ronnie James Dio.
Mm-hmm.
Black Sabbath played their final concert on February 4th, 2017, and have sold over 70 million records worldwide, making them one of the most commercially successful heavy metal bands of all time. With all of that being said, Ken Hoffman, when did you first start listening to Black Sabbath? What are your earliest memories of the band? And when did you first see the mighty Black Sabbath?
Well, we have talked about this on many occasions on many of these podcasts. That Columbia House 12 cassette box that I received of various artists, from Ozzy Osbourne to Metallica to Death to Men at Work, was my first introduction to a lot of the music that influenced my, middle school and high school years, and then obviously then really the rest of my life. Yeah. That was in 7th grade, and I got Ozzy Osbourne, Randy Rhoads tribute. That was my first intro to Ozzy, but I also got Master of Puppets, and that was my first intro to Metallica. Between those two, very quickly, I ramped up in the metal scene. You know what I mean? It was like I found my niche, I found my music, and it was like consume, consume, consume. So very quickly, whether it's just through Ozzy's solo, going back in history, or more likely also understanding what Metallica, I was so into Metallica, and they were always very vocal about who their influences were. And they were always like Sabbath, Sabbath, Sabbath. Between those two things, I very quickly discovered Sabbath and very quickly determined that Sabbath was my favorite over Ozzy solo, actually. So I was a Sabbath fan really before I was an Ozzy solo fan, although Randy Rhoads tribute, the live album, was something that I listened to like religiously once I first got it. So while Ozzy's catalog up to that album was what I knew first, once I discovered Sabbath, boom, I was deep in Sabbath. That's just how it goes. What about you? When did you first discover Sabbath?
I would say I discovered them as early as I discovered rock radio. Like you turn on the radio, as a youth, you kind of are figuring out what's your station, right? So my station was Laser 103 in Milwaukee, and that was the rock station. They played the rock and the heavy music, and Sabbath, War Pigs, Iron Man, Paranoid, like all of that on the radio all the time. And so the existence came to be a long time ago, and the first time that I saw Sabbath was exactly 20 years ago from now, which was at Ozfest 2001.
Yeah,
and check this lineup out. This was Black Sabbath headlining, Marilyn Manson, and this is like peak Marilyn Manson, like the outrageous version. Slipknot was touring on the Iowa album. Linkin Park was touring on Hybrid Theory. Disturbed was touring on The Sickness.
Right, first album.
And Mudvayne was playing on the second stage, touring on LD50.
Right. I also saw this show, but I actually think it was the second time I saw Sabbath. I think I saw Sabbath on their first Ozfest lineup in '97 when they played in Giant Stadium in New Jersey. So that was Ozzy opened. Ozzy was the headliner, his solo band. Sabbath played before Ozzy, so Ozzy did his double set. Pantera, Typo Negative, and Manson was also on that. So a lot of those bands played a lot of the same early Ozfest. Like Slipknot was on like a bunch of the first 5 Ozfests. Manson did a lot of those ones, but I think I saw Sabbath 3 or 4 times when they played at Ozfest, and I think that they played Ozfest 5 or 6 times, something like that. My memories get a little fuzzy about when, you know what I mean? All that shit kind of mixes up together after a while because I always usually saw them in the same venue in Jersey, although the Giant Stadium one was not their typical venue they played. They usually played PNC and Homedale. So, but I definitely saw Sabbath I saw Sabbath at least twice, I think 3 or 4 times potentially even on the Ozfest.
Yeah, I know. The first time I saw him was 2001. The second time I saw Sabbath was 2005. And that was with Iron Maiden opening for them.
I definitely saw the Maiden one too. So, because that was only the second time I had seen Maiden. I remember Maiden's stage setup was very like mellow for Maiden, you know?
Yeah.
So, I definitely saw those 3 then.
And I think the year either before this or after this was Ozzy headlining with Judas Priest supporting. So this was also the first time I was seeing Maiden and Priest back to back.
The Priest lineup.
Let's talk a little bit about the significance of Ozfest, though. Like for those people who have not experienced Ozfest, like because I don't think there's anything that compares to it now.
Right.
There's some good festivals for sure, but the fact that this toured, like this package toured.
Well, you have to give credit to Lollapalooza first. If you're going to talk about Ozfest, I think you have to talk about Lollapalooza first because that was really like the first festival that toured the country, more than one show. And I think usually festivals were sort of like at that time, there'd be like one. It'd be like Monsters Rock. You know what I mean? You'd have one location and you do one, you get a whole bunch of awesome bands. It was not a traveling show. Lollapalooza, Perry Farrell, Jane's Addiction fame, he sort of started that. And then I think Sharon, who did this sort of thing, replicated Lollapalooza, but all for metal with obviously her husband headlining it every time. So
do you know the story about Ozzy being asked to play Lollapalooza?
I don't.
Okay, so I don't know if they tried to be on Lollapalooza or they were invited to play Lollapalooza, but basically Ozzy and his camp were told that Ozzy wasn't cool enough to play Lollapalooza.
And we'll do our own.
And so Sharon said, okay, fine, we'll do our own. Right. And it kind of worked out perfectly because Ozfest was the answer for the freaks, the weirdos, the metalheads. This created this kind of community. The first time I went to Ozfest, it was just like, I'd never experienced that kind of an environment.
Great. And with a second stage of like up and coming bands, like I remember seeing Incubus on the Science tour playing like third on the second stage. Like nobody was there, but I knew them and I got to meet what's his name, Brandon, the lead singer, and
Brandon Boyd,
his dreads, and I was like, dude, you sound just like Mike Patton, man, you're awesome. He was like, oh, thanks. Like you don't get that kind of exposure, and then 30, 40 years later, you're like, dude, look how big everybody is now. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Look. Ozfest was great for everything you just said. Great for those bands, great for the fans, great for the scene, great for just the metal community in general across the board. And you got some heavy hitters in those lineups. Like, the first time I saw Motorhead was at Ozfest. The first time I saw Sabbath was at Ozfest. I saw Maiden at Ozfest. The early days of Lamb of God I saw at Ozfest when they were making the transition from second stage to first stage. So you knew if you were getting off the second stage to the first stage that you were sort of making it in the scene, like that was a big bump. So Ozfest was great for all those reasons.
I would say too, coming from the hardcore scene, Ozfest was the big gateway where like I listened to all these like really great heavy bands with these big breakdowns and these big mosh pits and all this stuff, but they didn't have the commercial success, right? So they're touring, people love them, but like the mainstream metalheads had no idea that these bands exist.
Right.
They don't know that a Hatebreed exists. They
I
don't
was just
know
about
that
to say Hatebreed. That's how I got introduced to Hatebreed.
Hatebreed, Bury Your Dead, Throwdown, It Dies Today, Atreyu, like these are all
Mm-hmm.
bands that went and played the second stage at Ozfest.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing you know, they're on the cover of all the metal magazines.
Right.
They're in Hot Topics. It was a really big thing and like a sense of pride within the hardcore community because you're like, these are my people.
Right.
And like you go to work and there'd be like the guy that was like, yeah, Pantera, oh, I love metal.
Right.
And but had no idea that there were bands that were just as heavy or heavier than the bands that they listened to.
Yeah.
Until they go to the Ozfest and they see this band just melt their face off. And now they're lifelong fans of Bury Your Dead because they saw them at Ozfest.
Yeah.
They buy the shirt. Cool exposure. And I just don't think that exists anymore.
And what's cool about it too is that it was so very uniquely metal. Like Lollapalooza would have like this sort of weird eclectic lineup. You know what I mean? A lot of these festivals have a little bit of everything. And in some circumstances, that's great. You know, if you want a buffet of bands. I particularly like festivals where it's like all metal. It's all my people. I have a sense of safety and comfort there. You know what I mean? And you might discover something that you don't know. So like, I don't want to waste my time and spend a lot of money on a ticket for like sitting around for 10 bands I don't give a shit about. You know what I mean? But the chances of finding a nugget, in a metal festival like this are much greater because it's very specific to the genre that you listen to,
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the actual sound of Black Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of elements here. I mean, you start with the down-tuned heavy doom riffs of Tony Iommi, the iconic sound of Ozzy's voice. It's a very original sound. It's very much his own sound.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably technically better singers out there.
Sure.
But you don't have to be technically
Dio,
good to
right?
be, like it's just like art, right? Like if you like it, you like it. And there's a human aspect and there's some specific singers that I can think of that are in very popular bands and the singer's almost too good. So to me, it's not human enough. It's like Phil Anselmo. He's got like that natural grit that gives him the beauty of the human aspect of the metal voice. Then Ozzy's charisma and later Dio's charisma, like this charismatic front person, and not an angry front person, right? Like happy, energetic, power with the people. Geezer Butler as a bassist and a lyricist, by far one of the goats of bass playing. I put him right up there with Geddy Lee, Cliff Burton, Les Claypool.
Yeah,
those are kind of those guys would probably end up in my top 10 along with Geezer. And lastly, you have the bluesy riffs of Tony Iommi, but then you have the jazzy big band drum style of Bill Ward.
The swing of Bill Ward. I mean,
yeah, he's an orchestral drummer. He like brings images to the music, and that influence. You don't often get the jazz with the blues, when you put those together, when you really, especially listen to the early Sabbath, that sound is created from tried and true musical styles.
What I appreciate about Sabbath and it just sort of, it transcends like a lot of different topics for them, but is also relevant for the sound. When we talk about the sound is that all four members of the band are equal components. Like you mentioned Les and, the other members of Primus are very significant and very talented in the success of Primus. But like Les Claypool sort of like gets a lot of the credit, over Lair and over, Herb and everybody else. And it's like, it's very much his creative endeavor. Sabbath is an equal sum of four parts. Like the swing of Bill Ward, like when I listen to some of the drums, and we'll get into it when we start talking about specific albums when we're ranking it, I'm just kind of like blown away by how much emphasis and power the drums have in those songs and shape those songs. And the same thing about bass. Bass, like you know, like you didn't even hear the bass in, you know, in Justice for All. You know what I mean? It's like bass is sometimes totally insignificant, and there's so many jokes about bass
Wait,
players.
what?
But
What?
I
Those are
mean,
fighting words.
you don't know anything about that, I'm sure. But you know, I mean, Geezer, it's not just his bass lines, which are phenomenal, and backbone these songs. This dude, let's just talk about the underrated, underappreciated lyricist that he is.
Yeah.
Which I kind of knew and I kind of recognized, but didn't really get until I was like deep diving for this podcast, and I was like when I was trying to figure out my ranking, and I was studying songs and sort of watching the progression of the lyrics develop. I was like, dude, this guy's awesome. His lyrics are awesome. And typically you're like, oh, doesn't the vocalist write the songs? They're like, well, nope, that's all Geezer, dude. Ozzy, he just sang, you know what I mean? So in a lot of ways, Ozzy was like the least contributing to the band. He just kind of sang and drank, you know, and did drugs, but he's also the face and the charisma, you know. So truly, all of these guys are like equal parts, and that is very significant in this conversation about the sound of Sabbath. Like all of them, you take them out, it's different bands. It's a less successful bands. So.
Yeah.
But you do talk about there's obviously the blues influence. There's this jazzy thing. There's this sort of weird proggy 70s things that happens like, you know, later on, and, you know, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath on, you know, I mean, there's a lot of different weird shit that's happening. So the sound of Sabbath is really an evolution that does create heavy metal. I think it also does create what I would call hard rock too. You know, but because there's a lot of different things that are happening in there, but there's just no denying the influence that this band has created on all sounds, you know, moving forward, all bands moving forward. So, I mean, we're just stating, you know, what every single heavy metal band on earth has said after they listened to Sabbath, you know?
Well, and you know, we were talking the other day about like hard rock versus heavy metal,
Right.
and something that popped in my head last night was if you equate it on today's terms, like today's level of heaviness,
Yeah.
Sabbath at the time was like a death metal band. It's a time of flower power,
Right?
And the Vietnam War is raging on, and there's all these flower power songs about love and peace, and Sabbath is embracing the violence that's going on in the world, and really showing a mirror to the world. And so to us, it sounds like very light, like the music is light, but at the time it was. And we're talking like a razor's edge of difference between like Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath. But at the time, I think Led Zeppelin was pop music, and Sabbath was for the stoners and the freaks, you know,
Right.
like,
yeah, those are all good points. Like it's all relative to what's happening in the moment when this stuff is being released, as opposed to trying to compare it to the definition of heavy metal and hard rock now, you know?
yeah. Just because some like hipsters now are jamming on some Sabbath-like sounds,
Yeah.
it's different than the level of metal now. Speaking of like the technical side of Sabbath, there's one like very important element to their sound, and we can just look at the first song, Black Sabbath, on the album Sabbath, which is utilizing the tritone.
Right.
And this goes back to like Richard Wagner and, you know, the orchestras of days past. But the tritone is also known as the devil's chord, the devil's interval, the triad, and the flatted fifth. As its Latin moniker suggests, it's an evil sounding combination of notes that's designed to create a chilling or foreboding atmosphere. And really it's like that evil metal sound. Like when you hear them play that note, which is what they play in the beginning of that song, that's when we talk about what is metal. To me, that defines metal right there. And that's like a technical thing, you know, and it's what we react to the same way, like how Movie soundtracks now often will create music that really tries to make you feel something instead of just putting music to a scene. They're trying to actually affect you.
Yeah, and you know, it does set the stage because the song Black Sabbath and Wicked World were the first two songs that Sabbath wrote as a band together. Could you imagine if you're like just a band with your buddies and you're like, hey, let's just jam, you know? Yeah, oh yeah, we went to high school together. I saw your advertisement in the paper in the window there. Oh yeah. We want to jam. You have a PA? Sure. I mean, that's how it started, right? And then the first thing you crank out is Black Sabbath. Jesus, you know what I mean? Like there's clearly like some higher power is like playing through you. You know what I mean? Like that's some sort of intervention.
Well, I was gonna say it's like when you try to create something versus you just naturally, organically, something comes out of you. And I think all the greats, they may be inspired by others, but there's something innate in them that comes out when they pick up that guitar or pick up the drums or the bass or whatever that just sets them apart from other musicians.
Well, it's funny because really it wasn't like, hey, these were all super, like they sought each other out and like, oh, you're talented, I want to play with you. Like it was literally, you know, Ozzy had a PA for his father, bought him a PA, and he put up an ad in the local music shop, Ozzy Zig seeks gig, and Tony responded to it, and it was like, I think Geezer and Ozzy were buddies, and Tony and Bill were buddies, and they all and like they saw this ad, and Tony was like, yeah, I think I know this guy Ozzy. I went to school with him. He's a year younger than me, but he was a dork, dude. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like, oh, I know him. He's a great singer. Let's jam with him. It was like, no, he has a PA. There's no other ad out there. So it is really sort of this divine intervention that brought them together. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really neat fate thing. You know what I mean? It's sort of like the same thing with like Lars and Hetfield. The only ad in the newspaper was Lars's ad. You know what I mean? Well, if that's all my only options, then I guess I'll reach out to this guy. You know what I mean? And then that's it. And then there's no other band. So
well, and so take a band like Metallica. I was thinking that before you said that. Look at Dave Mustaine. He's part of that. He's part of that original version of the band. And just like Black Sabbath, something brings you guys together and you create this magic, but you can't control people's drug addictions, their alcoholism, their personalities, maybe their I'm likes to fight guy when I get drunk. They're also, that's why all those years later they have a therapist sitting in with them because they're immortally like 17-year-olds.
Right.
When a band of professionals comes together, there's usually it's a professional relationship, but a lot of successful bands are a bunch of kids who get together and they're immortally those same kids, just kids that are given money and drugs and success and fame. And, the one thing that they did come up with on their own though, that added to the sound and the creation of the metal was the whole concept of that they rehearsed across the street from a movie theater. And Tony said, isn't it strange that people go to the movies and they pay money to be scared? And they're like, oh, what if we did that, but with our music?
Yeah. There was sort of I think a deliberate play and then a lucky play that happened with Sabbath. Like, growing up where they did, Birmingham was still a war-torn city. You know what I mean? They grew up, it was very blue collar. It was very rough. And it was a complete opposite than Haight-Ashbury, where everybody was like, let's boycott the war in a different way. The attitudes were very different. So Sabbath sounds was reflective of that. It was grittier, it was darker, it was doomier by nature. But they were also like, yeah, let's do this deliberately. I mean, and even later on, as they were starting to get successful and Zeppelin was starting to get successful and they were friends with Zeppelin, they're like, let's make heavier music than Zeppelin. It was always a very deliberate thing for them. And even after, they were they were named Earth before, but they were called the Polka Tulk Blues Band before that. And the name was because Polka Tulk talcum powder. It's like baby powder. It's like after you wipe your ass, after you take a shit, you put this powder on. That was sitting on the shelf in Ozzy's bathroom, and that's why they named their band after that. And they're like, we can't continue to go on naming our band this. We can't even be Earth. There was another band named Earth at the time that was causing confusion, but they're like, we need something scarier. We need something heavier. And they were like, well, dude, what about the Boris Karloff movie Black Sabbath? And that was like, dude, done, boom, let's kill it, you know? So there's a very deliberate play that was happening by them too, as well as just sort of some natural things that were the sounds coming from their environment and their background. So whether that was luck or deliberate or a little bit of combination of both, it was a perfect mix.
All right, it's time for the ranking. Today we will be ranking our top 5 Black Sabbath albums. Ken and I have not compared notes prior to this, so this is the first time that we're actually seeing each other's lists. We will go through our lists 5 through 1, and then we will discuss going back and forth.
Okay. I knew you were going to have Heaven and Hell in there somewhere, and I think you knew that I was not. After that, I didn't know where anything else was going to fall. And this ranking was probably more difficult than ranking Tool. But the same thing sort of applies. Like at any given time, my mood can really change the placing of these things. So, you know, at least after the first 3 albums, like I'm pretty hard set on 1 through 3, and I can give those reasons. 4, 5, and then I even have a 6 one. I feel like they can interchange depending on, am I driving? Am I exercising? You know, am I hanging out with friends? Which is the better album to play at that moment? Because they're all equally good, you know? So, but yeah,
all right.
I ranked them this way. So let's do it.
All right. So at number 5, I've got 1975 Sabotage. Ken, you've got Volume 4. For number 4, I have Master of Reality from 1971. You have the debut album Black Sabbath. Number 3, I have the Dio fronted Heaven and Hell from 1980. And you have Sabbath Bloody Sabbath from 1973. We both sync up on our number 2 pick, which we both went with 1970s Paranoid, which is the second album by Sabbath. So our number 2 pick is also their second album. And then for number 1, I went with the debut, Black Sabbath, 1970. And you went with Master of Reality, 1971. Ken, why don't you start out with your number 1 pick, Master of Reality?
Well, clearly it's because I own the T-shirt. You know what I mean? But
I almost wore the same shirt.
You know, I wanted to be that guy today that wears the shirt to the concert, you know. Master of Reality to me is the best album for a couple of reasons. The first one, I think probably the best song, the best commercial song ever written from Sabbath, Children of the Grave, is on Master of Reality. That is near perfect. It is a perfect song. Riff wise, drum wise, geez, Billboard's drumming in Children of the Grave is unbelievable. But it is, you know, a very well known song, but it's not so well known where I bucket it in with I don't want to listen to it ever again. And there's a couple Sabbath songs, including Sweet Leaf, which is the opener on this album. I don't need to listen to Sweet Leaf again because we've heard it too much. But the main reason why I think that this album ranks number 1 is because everybody universally says Black Sabbath invented heavy metal. And to me, the song, it comes down to a very specific song that invented heavy metal, and it's Into the Void. Into the Void, the riffs, That is literally the invention of thrash metal. Sweet Leaf is the invention of stoner metal. Orchid, Lord of this World, that's like doom metal. You have literally like the inventions of all these genres of metal on this album. Black Sabbath and Paranoid. Paranoid is poppier to me, more in the hard rock camp. The first Black Sabbath album with the harmonica on Wizard, way bluesier, way more jam at the end with, the closing song, A Bit of Finger, Sleeping, Village, The Warning. It's way more jammy. Black Sabbath are the fathers of heavy metal. Master of Reality is the album that really invented that term. That's my vote.
Well, I think we talked about before, 1 through 5 here is really 1A through
right.
1E. Like, these are all top albums. It's really hard to make a decision. And especially when you get towards the bottom of the list, they're very interchangeable. I had Master Reality at number 4. So I obviously love that album as well. I went with, I was actually surprised when I saw this because I kind of thought it was an unforegone conclusion that Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath is the best Black Sabbath album, because that is the architect of metal. Like, that is the album. There was nothing before it, and the world changed after it.
Right.
So that's why I have to put it down. Now, the greatest heavy metal band of all time, I still give that to Metallica.
Right.
But there is no Metallica without Black Sabbath.
Right.
So there's a lot of factors here. Interesting facts. This album was pretty much all one takes. And that life of that comes through. Even Ozzy was singing live in a separate room when they were recording. There's I'll throw this meme up on the screen, but Black Sabbath's debut on the Black Sabbath on Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. Like, you can't get like that right there is why this is my number 1 pick.
Right. I know that's like the perfect meme of all time, I think. And look, I don't disagree with anything that you say here, because every answer on this, top 5, with the exception of Heaven Hell, is correct. And the reason, and we'll get into that when we get into that, and I'll defend my position. But Master Reality to me is so groovy and so heavy, Oh God. I can just sit here and hum riffs to you the entire podcast and be happy doing that. And the majority of them are going to be on albums like 3, 4, 5. You know what I mean? It's going to come after Black Sabbath or after Master Reality. I think they really find their groove after these albums, and probably because, they're a little bit bigger. They have more money now. They have more recording time. They have a little bit, they're starting to, they're in that phase where the drugs are making them creative and not ruining their career. So you're starting to see more experimental stuff. But I love the groove. I love the groove of Lord of this World. I love the groove of Into the Void. I love the mellowness of Solitude, where you're like, dude, is that even Ozzy singing? There was a rumor that was Bill Ward singing for many years, and I thought that was Bill Ward singing on Solitude. Bill Ward didn't even sing on until like Never Say Die and Technical Ecstasy. So the shift in Ozzy's vocals on that song. I love the little guitar lick in Embryo that starts off Children of the Grave. I just think it's, oh God, the swinging drums. It's like a freight train. Children of the Grave. Can you imagine? And this goes to the power of Bill Ward. If Bill Ward was not in that band and that drum line was not in that song, great riff. But man, with the freight train that is that drum, the drum sound in that song, it's just phenomenal. And
that's definitely Children of the Grave is definitely one of the songs that I always am most looking forward to live when I see them.
Yeah. I have a very hard time saying what my favorite Sabbath song of all time is, but it's definitely it's probably between, 3 or 4 that I'll say again, depends on the mood that I'm in. But Children of the Grave is always going to be in that. Like, that's probably my default answer when I have to come up with one in a pinch. I'm like, Children of the Grave, and like, how can my favorite song not be the favorite album? You know, when you have to split hairs, you have to come up with some justification.
Yeah, see,
Into the
that's
Void,
where,
Lord of this World, Children of the Grave, nothing hits harder in the rest of the catalog than those three songs.
yeah, I mean, I think that's why our lists diverge a bit, is because I'm all the early stuff. So it's going to be The Wizard, it's going to be Wicked World, it's going to be NIB.
What's funny is you say the early stuff. These albums came out in 1970, 1970, and 1971.
Yeah, well,
you know,
the
first three albums, you're like, oh, the early stuff? You mean 6 months earlier?
Well, 5 albums between 1970 and 73. Like,
it's amazing.
But there was a very rapid evolution in their style, right?
We waited 15 years in between 2 albums, and Sabbath put out their best thing in 9 years, you know? So their whole best catalog in 9 years. So it's
a very rapid evolution of sound there. But I went with that as the architect. My number 2 pick was Paranoid, because I felt like Self-Titled is the architect. The second album, Paranoid, is the perfection.
Right.
That is, to me, Paranoid is like their Black album. So the Black album isn't my favorite Metallica album,
right,
but it was like where they had hit the perfect balance of, like, when you listen to Paranoid, your mom's going to know Iron Man, your mom's going to know War Pigs, your mom's going to know, you know, the Paranoid. Like, these are all things that are like generationally known.
And that's exactly why I ranked Paranoid number 2 as well. It is the greatest album that I never need to listen to ever again, because of it. They have been played so much. What really kills me, and it's no fault of theirs, is that, you know, you have a song like Iron Man, it makes it into the movie called Iron Man. Why is Tony Stark wearing a Never Say Die shirt? Why is he not wearing a Paranoid shirt? You know what I mean? Like, come on, guys. If you're going to do it right, please. That irks me. So I'm like, I don't even want to watch another Marvel movie because of that mistake. I'm like, if you're so into putting your little, like, what do they call them, Easter eggs and shit into your movies, and you're putting your little, like, oh, if you watch this at quarter speed, you're going to find there's a secret character hidden in the background, but yet you put Never Say Die in the Iron Man movie, you're a fucking idiot. You know what I mean?
I have an equal question from the Black Sabbath camp, why they use that for their posters towards the end as well. Like, they used the mask. Like, why? Like, I get it. Like, you're like, we didn't use this enough, so let's use it. Like,
I don't know.
I thought it was really rad that for the end they used the Masters of Reality logo.
Right.
Like, that was a good decision.
Right. Those are all. That's a great question. I don't know, but in any case, I'm digressing on the whole Avengers thing here, the Iron Man thing. The reality is, it is, when you go back and listen to it, it's a perfect album. I mean, because you roll in with, like, those 3 chart-topping songs, but then you've got Electric Funeral, Hand of Doom, and then Fairies Wear Boots. You know, I mean, Hand of Doom, when it, like, the breakdown and the heaviness of Hand of Doom after sort of the mellow start to that, you're like, dude, I was listening to that on the way back in the drive from Seattle to Sacramento, and I was making my entire family listen to the Sabbath catalog in prep for this. And when Hand of Doom came on, I was like, okay, I have to rank this album second because of all these reasons, and because Hand of Doom and Electric Funeral are winners. And then Fairies Wear Boots, as simple as the lyrics are, and I think that's something we can talk about later, the evolution of Geezer. It's a great song. But the first 2 albums, I want to talk real quickly about how underappreciated just the song names are. Like, if you had a song like A Bit of Finger, Rat Salad, like, those are just like instrumental little things, but what great nomenclature. Oh my God. Like, you can name bands those things, you know, like, Behind the Wall of Sleep. I'm like, dude, that's deep, dude. I just love the names of the songs that they came up with. I mean, War Pigs, these are great band names.
good luck naming any band after any of these songs, because as soon as you Google it, there's like 100 stoner bands that are all named after these songs.
Totally,
Like,
totally. But like
um,
Rat Salad, what a great name, you know? A Bit of Finger, what a great name. Jack the Stripper, you know? It's so good. It's so good.
so to your point about like never needing to listen to this album,
Yeah.
I'm listening to this album for Electric Funeral, Hand of Doom,
And Doom.
Fairies Wear Boots. Like,
Yep, exactly.
like those are my favorite songs. Like, yes, those other songs are awesome and they are the better songs, and
Right.
there's a reason that they've been overplayed.
Yeah.
But my favorite songs on the album are the second half of the album.
Agreed. Right. And I had to take that into consideration when I was ranking these. So this is not necessarily a ranking. Well, it is. It's a ranking of my favorite, but it's also a ranking of what I think it should be like in their best. Like it's very hard and subjective, and why I rank number one is not the same reason why I rank number two, you know, but it was the best that I could come up with.
So interestingly, you know, if you are looking at the album artwork for this album, you're going to notice there's a little dude on the cover, and with a sword and a shield,
and a helmet, right?
Yeah. So this album was actually titled War Pigs, and they went into the studio to record the album, and they noticed, hey, we're a little short on material. Can you guys come up with another song?
Yeah.
So they basically wrote a throwaway song, and that throwaway song was Paranoid. And then Paranoid makes the album, obviously. Then they renamed the album to be named after the song, which is the big hit single, and the rest is history.
Well, they renamed the album Paranoid before it became a hit because they were afraid that War Pigs would alienate, you know, the audience or the consumer from it, because it was still, you know, pretty radical time, and people were afraid that would impact sales. But
it goes back to that whole death metal comparison. They were edgy.
There's probably a million songs that's like has a similar story. Like, oh yeah, we wrote War Pigs, or we wrote Paranoid in a half an hour because we needed one more song on the album. And I just had a riff in my head, and I was like, and Geezer just threw some lyrics out. Boom, like their greatest song ever. You know what I mean? It's like phenomenal how that works.
Okay, so number 3, you have Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath from 1973. Tell me a little bit about that.
There are some songs that some movies, some books that just hit you in a way. And there are some songs on this album that do that. And I think we're going to dive into that a little bit deeper later on. But I love every single song on this. It gets weirder. It gets proggier. It gets experimental. It gets softer. But Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath has one of the greatest like breakdown heavy riffs in the middle. The bridge is just phenomenal. A National Acrobat. God, it's like, you know, you talk about, they say like the tritone in Black Sabbath, like it's the devil's note. It hits you. The opening riff to National Acrobat hits me in a way. It like goes right down my spine every single time I hear it. I don't know why that song in particular. So when I say Children of the Grave is my favorite song, well, maybe it's a National Acrobat, because there's just, you know, and the lyrics now are way deeper and way more intellectual and way more complex than they were on the first 2 albums or the first 3 albums. So Geezer's taken the next step on this album. And it's there. I don't think that there's a bad track on it. It gets a little stranger, but those are really, I mean, you got to rank them somewhere, and that's where I put this one, based off of really the strength of Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and National Acrobat. But I love Spiral Architect. I love Looking for Today. I mean, my answers for the next 4 answers are going to be the same. Well, I just love this album, so I put it here. You know, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. I like Sabracadabra. I like Who Are You? If I'm being honest, this is probably my like 7th ranked Sabbath album. for me, it's just a little too light. It's a little too poppy.
It's
They
definitely
definitely
lighter.
were getting in that groove, the success, the cocaine, the drugs.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be well, I mean, we see it all the time with modern metal bands where they take a turn, they get a little more melodic, they put the clean vocals on.
It's
That's
definitely
this kind of what Sabbath was up to here. There's those little bit of groove riffs. You know, in their career, they had some side steps where they did stuff like that, where they just did the little more poppy route because they're rock stars.
Hence my argument about heavy metal / hard rock. This is their hard rock album, but I really like this album. They definitely have
we were
different
ranking their
sounds.
top 5 metal albums, so
I think it just says top 5 Black Sabbath albums right across the top of the screen there, big guy. So I
like the album. I mean, again, I love Sabbath, so there's not like none of this is going to be. I mean, after Sabotage, I'm out for a while, but so for my number 3 pick, I have the amazing, glorious Ronnie James Dio led. Bill's still on drums at this point. Heaven and Hell album from 1980. To me, this was the rebirth of the band. Like they had really kind of lost their way. There was a lot of things going on, and to have that rebirth, create the band as a challenge again, and the music is phenomenal. It kicks off with Neon Nights, and then it's followed by the mid-tempo Children of the Sea, which is the first song they wrote together. I've got lots to say about Dio, but I'll save that for like when we get to the Dio discussion later.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I should start shredding you now or later, but I'll leave it at this. I'm a Sabbath purist, and I know that there are Sabbath purists who exist that say there is no Sabbath doesn't exist after Ozzy. And I'm in that camp. I am not saying that Dio fronted Sabbath is not a good or even a great band. I'm not saying that. I'm saying they should not be called Black Sabbath. So when I consider Black Sabbath, I actually consider the first 6 albums Black Sabbath because Never Say Die and Technical Ecstasy are pretty terrible and pretty universally agreed that they're terrible albums. I mean, there's a couple on there that you're like, all right, maybe I could take them, but I can't put Dio in there, even if when I do, and I like Heaven and Hell a lot. I just cannot rank it when I think of Sabbath. I think they should have called the band Heaven and Hell, and later on they did for legal reasons or whatever. But
so here's the problem with that argument. You don't get to pick. like Dio joining Sabbath and them deciding to continue to call it Black Sabbath means it is part of the catalog and it is to be ranked. So if you don't want to rank it based on him singing, that makes sense. But I thought what you were going to say is there's heavy metal purists and there's Black Sabbath purists. Right. Heavy metal purists definitely accept the Ronnie James Dio led Sabbath, especially because they looked at it as in like Ozzy failed us and Ronnie kept the legacy alive. He kept it. And to your point, it basically is like a new band.
Right. The sound is different. Iommi's guitar is different. The vocals are different. It's, I mean, I get both parts of the argument, but I'm going to just stick with my biased opinion in this, really for no other good reason than the length of the catalog. If you have 8 albums already with one singer, and then you replace and have the success that you have with that, this isn't like, Dickinson replacing Paul Di'Anno after 2 albums. This is replacing a legend and a huge part of the band where earlier we said these 4 guys are equal members in every aspect of this band, the sound, the success, the chemistry. Now you're removing one and you're putting one in, and then Dio brings a different element into it too. Ultimately, did some of that lead to the breakup of the band? Was he too much of an ego? Maybe. Was he too talented? Maybe, So I just think as a purist here, I'm going to stick with, I can't put it in this ranking because of that. But it's also sort of, for me, like if you're a guy like Dio and you've had success in Rainbow, why would you even want to take that job? Unless it's just a personal exploit to get a solo album, which maybe that's what it was. But it's like, look, you break up with, you get a new girlfriend. Do you want to wear her ex-boyfriend's clothes? No, dude. You know what I mean? Like, you want to exercise all the demons.
I think that when you have an important element of a band leave, you want to replace it with an equal or better part. So that's where I'm sure that the theory here was that you were actually building a super group. You're bringing in somebody. The band was very happy that Geezer didn't have to write the lyrics.
Okay, so why
the band was very excited that they had a guy that wasn't like Dio wasn't a drug user. And then later Vinny comes in. That was also, but these are advantages for a band who has to be professional, is that you have people you can count on. Ozzy, they lost Ozzy. He disappeared for days. Like, so what I'm saying is, like, we talked earlier about, you start a band with your teenage friends and you don't have a choice of what their lifestyles are. So when you get to replace an element, and they discussed starting it as a new band, but the key was they wanted to play all of the original music. It's like when Brian Johnson comes into AC/DC, they don't want to disavow the early material. They want to play all of those albums and then write new albums.
It was a different reason, though, right? I was like, the dude died.
Ozzy was basically we'll cover that later, but basically they thought Ozzy was going to die. Like Ozzy was done with life. Like,
I'm not disagreeing with anything here, and I don't really know if there's ever going to be, like, there's never going to be a resolution what's right or what's wrong here. I'm just going to say that if I was a guy like Dio who was seeking success in my own right, I probably wouldn't have joined Black Sabbath and said, hey, let's keep the name Black Sabbath. I can understand maybe why Iommi wanted to do that, but at the same time, like, okay, like what I was trying to say is should we have called Audio Slave Rage Against the Machine? The only difference is Cornell over Zach, right?
No, it would be if they were going to play all the Rage material, then you could make a case for it. But if you're deciding that you're going to start afresh, which they did with a different style, and there's no denying that their style was different, but also they were equally doomy. Like, they were equally, if anything, they tilted back out of the pop realm that they had entered, and they went back to playing doom riffs and playing more metal.
I think the Dio years are poppier. It's starting into that 80s like pop metal sound. I think you've left doom behind after Sabotage. Doom was already gone. They're certainly heavier. Maybe pop's not the right word. Maybe it's like the synth sound that was starting to happen.
The more metal sound, you mean?
I don't know, man.
They were evolving into the more like metal realm of like. So what I would say, again, you said this earlier, is you can pick an album based on a song. This album is largely based on the song "Heaven and Hell," right. Which goes in the realm of like greatest metal songs of all time. It's 7 minutes long. It's just one of those like epic opuses of metal. Right. Again, Neon Nights and Die Young are probably my other two. Like, if there's three songs that are like hold this album up for me. The other way that I look at these top 5 lists is this is also kind of like a deserted island kind of a list to me. Mm-hmm. So I do want, like, you could make an argument that's why Sabbath Bloody Sabbath shows up on your list, is because it's diversely different than the other material. So for me, Heaven and Hell goes in there and it goes in there pretty high because I've got my Sabbath covered with 1 and 2, which is the self-titled and Paranoid. That's, to me, the 2 greatest Sabbath albums. And then the reboot, which is Heaven and Hell, that goes in at number 3 because I could go with just those 3 albums, and the other 2 I could cut loose if I had to. Mm-hmm. that's just kind of how I looked at the top 5, though.
Mm-hmm.
So you good with Heaven and Hell? You want to move on? Keep going.
Yeah, well, we can argue.
We'll come back. We'll come back to this. So number 4, you had my number 1 pick, Black Sabbath.
Right.
Why so low on your list?
Probably because it's just a little raw. A bit of finger, Sleeping Village, Warning is a little all over the place. In a good way, though. You know what I mean? These are, again, this is splitting hairs. These are minor differences.
Yeah.
But I definitely thought, well, shit, I need to have Black Sabbath up higher in the ranking because it's the first album. It's the creation of the sounds. And Black Sabbath is a great song. I love NIB. Love NIB. And Wizard's almost in that camp where like, maybe I don't need to hear it that much anymore, but I still really appreciate it more so. It's more tolerable to me than, Paranoid and Sweetleaf and War Pigs. But Wicked World is a great song. But I do love, it gets a little jam bandy, on the last track when you're kind of going like the peaks and valleys of Sleeping Village and Warning. But, it does have some sick licks in there too. So I wanted to rank this album higher. I just kind of ran out of slots, and I just sort of landed on there because there are songs on the other albums that hit me still a little harder today than this album does. That's all. It's splitting.
These lists are so fun, but they're also so difficult.
Very difficult. Very, very.
And even day to day, right? Like when it's getting closer to like we need to present these ideas, like I'm like, but I was battling for the 5th slot right up to the end.
Yeah, and honestly, I sent you my list. Like I was making decisions seconds before I sent it to you, and I could very easily slot Volume 4,
all the Dio albums in your top
Sabotage.
5.
Sabotage is not on this because we have to stop at 5, but 4, 5, and 6, I could very easily put Sabotage above Black Sabbath. And the reason why I would say that is because when I put a Sabbath album on that I want to listen to, like start to finish, without having to fast forward through Paranoid, I either put on Master of Reality, Black Sabbath, or Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, or Sabotage. And I have that ranked 6th. So I'm like, well, shit, it could actually be 4th, Because if I put on like, this is Black Sabbath radio on Spotify, I'm like, okay, next, until I get to the deep cuts,
Yeah.
And there are more deep cuts on Master of Reality, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and Volume 4, and Sabotage than there is to me on Black Sabbath and Paranoid. But you just got to rank them somewhere. But I'm also trying to take out that bias and give credit to the history and the significance and the weight of that album. But, there's subjectivity, so whatever.
I was gonna say I feel like there's no deep cuts. Like I've listened to all the Sabbath so much, especially after after Master of Reality, it all blurs together until Dio comes in, because then it's a different vocalist, but it all you kind of interchange the albums. My number 4. What's interesting is our number 4s and our number 1s are swapped. So I have Master of Reality at number 4. You have Master of Reality at number 1. I have Black Sabbath as number 1. You have it at number 4. Master of Reality rules. Like all these albums, I love them all. Like I love Sabbath. Like you said, there's a lot of influence coming off of this album, and specifically, I would say that like if you go and see a Sabbath worship band, and I'm not talking about like a tribute band, but like the actual genre of Sabbath worship, this is the template for that. Sure. This is the doom stoner vibe. This is where you get bands like Sleep. It's all from this album, and this is the template of that. Sweet Leaf, Children of the Grave, Into the Freaking Void.
Oh God. I cannot wait for Into the Void when they play that live. I cannot wait. It's like it's just so crushing. And I'm like, man, they wrote this in 1971.
Well, that's what was funny is when I went and saw Ozzy, you're like, did he play any Black Sabbath? And he actually played a bunch of old stuff. Like it was good to hear. And I always like to bring the album art into this, like the cover for Master of Reality, the topography, your shirt that you're wearing right now, like that to me. And I'm a huge fan of the color purple already. I love the color purple. And then you have that cover that has that purple on it with the gray and the black, like just really cool. So lastly, number 5, you have Volume 4 from 1972.
Yeah, and very easily, I debated putting Sabotage in its spot. Again, 4, 5, and 6, I can swap any manner or any order depending on my mood. Volume 4, I put in the last one specifically because of the strength of Supernaut and Snowblinds. Those 2 songs crush, but also some of their heaviest riffs also come on Cornucopia and Under the Sun. There's a very famous heavy metal bar in Brooklyn, St. Vitus, named after St. Vitus Dance on this album. And the ending of Wheels of Confusion, or the Straightener, is such a good groove. Oh my God. Again, there are just certain riffs that Sabbath writes that blow me away. What's amazing about Sabbath, and I'll say this more than any other band that I listened to growing up, that I consider my favorites and I consider the biggest influencers of my life, the soundtrack of my life, I never get sick of listening to Black Sabbath's songs that really, really, really get me going. You know what I mean? These albums here, these tracks, they trigger me still to this day. Master Puppets doesn't really trigger me like that anymore, even though that's like, it did. Metallica did way more so. Maybe because Metallica burned so bright for so long. Maybe now the smoke is cleared and the fire is smaller. Sabbath has always been like this continuous slow burn for me that has never faded, And some of the tracks on Volume 4 are there. A lot of the tracks on Master Reality are there. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Those are the reasons why I'm sitting here freaking out about this podcast, because I'm like, I can't wait to just get this off of my chest. 46 years it has been consuming me. My God, I love this. Now I get to just talk about it and nerd out and geek out.
Well, for our listeners, this is what Ken and I used to do, like on our road trips and stuff. Like we did this for fun without a recording device in the room.
In between client presentations, this is what we did.
Greatest metal bass players, go! So to be able to do this and document it, and actually like we're like being held to the fire here. Like that, your statements about Dio will be held against you for the rest of your life.
Well, we knew this already, though, so you know what I mean. There's beauty in the difference, that's for sure.
But. So your number 5, Volume 4. I was actually, so I had Sabotage in number 5, and then I was like, no, I'm gonna switch it to Volume 4. And then I got your list, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to go with Sabotage so we can also talk about Sabotage, because I don't know which one I like more. Volume 4, I mean, Supernaut, Snowblind, and Under the Sun. Those songs to me are like the standouts. So I love that album. There's a lot of the like cocaine stories attached to the making of that album.
Another good meme for this one.
Whacked out of their minds and such. But I went with Sabotage from 1975. The thing with Sabotage was after Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, which was, like we talked about, was a little lighter, a little poppier. It was an angrier album. And that comes through on the riffs. You've got Hole in the Sky, Symptom of the Universe, which has that killer riffage, Super Czar. And they were having some like legal trouble with their past management at this time. So that kind of came through in the music with Sabotage. And I like the album art again. It's like that really bizarre, like they're standing up against a mirror, but the mirror is like
and Ward's
facing the wrong way.
Bill Ward's wearing his wife's red pantyhose or whatever it is. It's like, it's a strange album, a strange album art. But you're right. I could have ranked this higher as well. Symptom of the Universe, arguably their heaviest riff of all time. The invention, if Into the Void didn't invent thrash metal, Symptom of the Universe did. Another track that I really look forward to hearing live. There's some weird stuff on here. Am I Going Insane? Thrill of It All. I love that. I love the writ. I love when they get weird. I love when they get spacey. I love when they get jammy. There's a lot of that here. Great opener. Hole in the Sky crushes, man. You know, love this album. Absolutely love this album. Like, it's impossible to rank this stuff. And it was such a thrill to have a reason to just cram this into my pie hole for the last month straight. You know what I mean? And I will continue to do so for the next month, because that's how much of like a fanboy I am. It's not enough. Like, after this, I'm like, oh, Ryan said this about this. Let me go back and listen to that and validate.
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Or, you know what I mean? And I love that. I love debating, arguing, discussing like interests with people who have an opinion and a thought and are intelligent, because one, I like to know that I'm right about things, but also I like to be like, oh, I didn't see that, or I didn't hear that, or I didn't know that, and go and discover more about it. And it's fun to fill in all those little, we talked about this like the other day. It's fun to fill in all those little blanks about Sabbath. Like, we didn't dive deep into the history of Sabbath on to open the show, but learning some things about the history of the band that I didn't know about makes them so much more interesting. And you're like, wow, this is, you know, as people, as men, as artists, as, you know, entrepreneurs, as businessmen, you want to be able to understand and study successful people and how they got to that level, especially when that success is reliant on other people in a relationship. So to be able to dive into this kind of stuff and read it from Tony's autobiography or Ozzy's autobiography or the media's perspective or a documentary's perspective, or then my friend's interpretation of it, adds more to the value of your own opinion and your own reflection. And God, this it's so much fun. This is just so much fun. I love this shit. I really do. Okay, I'm done. I just blew my load.
All right. Well, speaking of like little nuggets that you can go home and you can research a little bit more, we're going to talk about the Dio years, Ken.
Okay. All right.
This started in 1980. So Ozzy quits the band before he gets kicked out of the band.
Right.
And that was short-lived. He comes back. They do another album. But then Ozzy's father passes away and he's just off the rails. So if you think about Ozzy under normal circumstances, he's kind of a wild card in the mix.
Right, for sure.
And all these guys are pretty, there's a lot of drugs. Again, like, I don't know how many times I'll say that in the podcast, but there was a lot of recreational partying going on during this time. But when Ozzy's father passes away, he's off the rails. And there's like, they have to cut him loose. They can't have him in the band anymore. It's now detrimental to the band. It's just not going to work out. He disappears once. They have to cancel their show. They think he got kidnapped. There's a woman that you may have heard of named Sharon Arden, who later becomes Sharon Osbourne. Her father, Don Arden, was a famous manager in the music industry. She introduces Ronnie James Dio to Tony Iommi and suggests that they work together. Ronnie is known. He was in a band called Elf. Then he was in Rainbow, very famously in Rainbow, which was Ritchie Blackmore's huge band when he came out of Deep Purple. I just love the Rainbow riffs and the lyrics and all this stuff. So Dio fronts Rainbow alongside Ritchie Blackmore. And then he and Tony talk about initially starting a new project. And that turns into, well, you know, basically we've already built this whole thing. Like, and you can definitely handle doing what Ozzy was doing. So why don't you come in the fold? We'll do some songs. We'll write some new music and we'll get things going. And this was good for the band because it was a challenge again. At this point, the band's just like in cruise control. Like, And you can tell that on the last two albums before
Yeah.
Ronnie joins the band, like not good music and albums that I do not put on.
Right. Yeah. And also too, the pressure was always on Tony to come up with the riffs, and the pressure was always on Geezer to come up with the lyrics.
Yes.
So there's no collaboration, at some point. In comes Ronnie, and Tony's got some riffs, and Ronnie just starts spewing lyrics like immediately right over top of that. And I think that's how Children of the Sea is born, right? Like that's the first song that they write together. And what I only appreciated about Dio's entrance was that for whether it's a criticism or not, as he always said, sort of Ozzy sang along with the lyrics, meaning like, the riff goes, and the lyrics go the same thing, you know what I mean? It's the same thing.
Yep.
Whereas Dio is singing across the riffs, where the
Like
melody
a rainbow.
is very
like
different.
a rainbow in the dark.
It's very different than the riff of the song, which adds another layer and, a complexity to the band. And I think that is probably why Iommi was like, dude, we can keep this name Sabbath and reinvent it and keep going. And I don't have to sort of start over to a certain degree. So I think he appreciated that. Whether I think that was the right move, that's the other question. But
I think
denying the significance of the talent that Dio brought as soon as he walked into the room.
I think that I from hearing what you're saying, your biggest hang up would be that they should have changed their name.
That's right.
And that's very understandable. And then I obviously can see why they wouldn't change the name. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of equity in what they had.
I can too.
He's a powerhouse coming into the band. I know that there's a lot of non-powerhouses that came into the band and some potential powerhouses that ended up not making it into the band. But so something that stood out to me, and this is something from going back years ago, I read a book called American Hardcore by Stephen Blush.
Okay.
And I would recommend anyone who's into like hardcore music, hardcore punk, they read this book, American Hardcore. It's kind of like the really like the tribal history of hardcore music. Mm-hmm. So it covers all the bands from every region of the United States. And in that book, they're talking about Black Flag, and they're talking with Henry Rollins, and Black Flag were like huge Black Sabbath fans. And so it's kind of a weird misnomer. Is that the right phrasing? Right. That like people in the hardcore scene, like kind of like dismiss corporate commercial metal bands and all this stuff. But like when stuff's good, it's good. Sabbath is good, so you like it. It's just like there's a lot of bands that have come out and been like, yeah, I've been a Kiss fan since the beginning of the band. But they could never admit that back in the day because that wouldn't be cool. They'd be a poser. So they're talking about Black Flag, their love of Black Sabbath. And Henry Rollins in that book, he says, the greatest thing about Dio joining Black Sabbath was for the first time, Black Sabbath had a real singer.
Right.
And, we talked earlier about the uniqueness of Ozzy's voice, but technically speaking, Dio was the first time they had this guy that could write and sing, and he could sing over the stuff. And I really appreciated that thought back then years ago when I read that, because I'm like, oh, I guess I never thought about that. Cause I always thought of him more as like the replacement. He comes in, he replaces him. But I think anytime you're going to do something like that with a band, you really want to bring somebody in that's going to do justice. And those were difficult shoes to fill. Like people loved Ozzy. So he really had to do a lot of work to win over the crowds. And again, his charisma, just like Ozzy's charisma, is the way that I think that he really connected with the crowds and was able to win them over. And then you have that weird thing going on where like Ozzy's rocking solo, which no one thought was possible, because they're like, Ozzy can't tie his shoes.
Right.
So we really have Sharon to thank for Ozzy having like. I love that we have both.
Right.
Like,
me too.
It's just
the world's
just
a better
like when
place.
David Lee Roth leaves Van Halen. I love that you have two versions. Now, I would say that the version of Black Sabbath with Dio is far greater than the Sammy Hagar version of Van Halen. But I like both, and I'm glad we got both. I'm glad we got at least one good David Lee Roth solo album.
So do you think that any band can change their singer and still move forward with that band name then based off of any of the arguments you've presented to me today? You talked about Anselmo earlier. What if Pantera said, you know what, we're gonna move on from Phil because of his disagreements with Dimebag? If none of those tragedies happened, could you have a Pantera without Phil Anselmo?
So yes, you can. Here's why. You have to essentially pretend that the original singer is dead, right? So you have to do an AC/DC. Here's an example. Damage Plan, not a good band.
Right.
Not good music.
Right.
Take that singer, put him into Pantera if that would have happened or something. It's much easier to accept and swallow than it is to have just no Pantera. Or, for example, Phil Anselmo and the Illegals going out and playing all Pantera songs. Now you have one member of Pantera, and the rest is just a cover band,
different.
right?
The name of the band is one person, essentially. When you're the and part of a band, you basically you're just filler. You're just the backgrounds,
My point being, though, is like that is our incantation of Pantera.
Right.
So, I mean, we've had the discussion before. What's greater? Is it the solo singer? Is it Vince Neil solo, or is it Motley Crue with a different singer?
Right.
Sometimes it's terrible, and sometimes it's like I almost like more that they didn't just get like an Ozzy impersonator to come in and try to be Ozzy Osbourne.
I've seen.
I like that they went
Sabbath cover bands. Could have been done. I think it's a really difficult argument for me to accept that the bands can continue on when you've had such a great success and there's such a huge personality, even if you're replacing the person with another huge, successful, and great personality. It's just, to me, a very difficult position. And maybe it's just my own personal bias. Like, would I want to do that? Would I want to come in and be the next singer of a band that I didn't create? It's probably my ego speaking and say, no, I would want to be the original and get it off the ground, and then it wouldn't succeed without me. You know what I mean? This is probably all ego driven. My interpretation of what a musician as an artist would be going through.
I have an example of that, though, which is there's probably better examples, but As I Lay Dying, their singer tries to kill his wife, hire a hitman. He goes to jail.
Right.
They did not replace him in that band. They started a new band with all the same members. They changed the name and has a new singer.
Right.
No one cared.
Right.
So it wasn't probably that singer coming in's choice to rename the band. They probably renamed it for legal reasons. Didn't do any As I Lay Dying material. But like the choice is be a millionaire or play an arena or play a club.
Right.
So if you stay Black Sabbath, you're going to play an arena.
The difference in this situation, though, is the commercial success that those bands had achieved prior to this situation happening. So As I Lie Dying is not a comparable situation to Black Sabbath because the strength of Black Sabbath also lied in Tony Iommi, So I fully believe that a Tony Iommi, Ronnie James Dio project could have gotten off the ground and been just as commercially viable from the very first album as Black Sabbath could have been.
People are coming to hear War Pigs. They're coming to hear Paranoid. They're coming to hear Sweet Leaf.
Maybe.
And
this is sort of my ego speaking as Dio. Like, if I put myself in Dio's shoes, do I want Ozzy's sloppy seconds, dude? You know what I mean?
I don't think he had to worry because he had the confidence. He overcame it. Like, he overcame it, and then that ended up leading to a solo career.
We talked about this, like, after Dickinson left Iron Maiden, and What's I can't ever remember
Blaze Bailey.
Blaze Bailey. Like, I wouldn't want that job. You know what I mean? I wouldn't want that job.
Yeah, I think the difference though is Blaze Bailey, nobody. Ronnie James Dio, pretty big deal.
Right.
Pretty big short deal.
Right.
So
I do love that, like, there's no shortage, no pun intended, of like mocking Dio from like every other camp. I mean, like, Ozzy did everything he can to, like, make fun of Dio in Sabbath. I mean, I think they had a show and they brought out a midget that was like dressed like him, that was like part of the stage setup, and there was, yeah.
it's not as terrifying as the Born Again album when they had a small person dress up like a demon baby and jump off the amps. Like, there's some messed up stuff there, but I think though too, again, you have to have the courage to know that you could be sick. You could, like, what would have happened if they would have continued on for years and years and years with Dio? Ozzy never comes back in the fold. But the fact that Dio departed and had a solo career, is maybe also a part of this, because there's been so much. And actually, that's the next thing we're going to talk about is like, look at this, man. The many eras of Sabbath from 1968 to 2017. There's 15 different versions of the band.
Right. And you're right. I think that this also is contributing to my reaction of Dio being in it, because he's sort of the start of this rotating, revolving door forever after that. It starts with the singer, then it's the drummer, then it's the bassist, then there's another singer, then there's another drummer, and then, you know what I mean? And on and on and on. And then they're like, oh, well, let's bring the other guy back in. And then, like, how many times can you do that and not feel like, somewhat used to a certain degree? I don't know. So,
yeah, I think that Tony, who is the only consistent member, the only constant, man, he really whored out the band.
Right.
Like, he really like, and again, go back to drugs. You need to have that constant income and that constant money. So he just kept putting all of his friends who were also famous musicians in the band, whether they belonged in the band or not. And then one thing I really hate with a band is when a band decides, Metallica's guilty of this, oh, we're just going to experiment and totally change what we're doing, and we don't care that the fans will come with us if there are real fans.
See, that's funny. That's where I guess you and I differ. I don't mind that. I might not like those albums, but I don't mind the fact that, Metallica made a Saint Anger or made the Lou Reed, crossover album, whatever. I don't listen to them, but again, as an artist, or just even like, how can you eat the same dinner every night, man? You can't.
That's why you do side projects. Why? So it's the same question
I only should
about
have done a side project with Ronnie James Dio. That's
and
then Ian Gillan, and then Tony Martin, and then Glenn Hughes, and whoever else was in the band.
Those all should have been Tony Iommi solo albums.
Right. And I think even one of them.
Again, Dio coming in was to do a real band, like the band.
Yeah.
So whether it was continuing on the name and continuing the material, which they were doing, which we're going to talk about later, as well as him covering the Ozzy material.
Yeah.
But to your point about, like, I don't mind those things. Well, then you shouldn't mind that they kept the name Black Sabbath, because that's what Metallica was doing. They're like, we're not going to be Metallica, but we're going to sell it to you as Metallica. So to the same point, you could say, well, Ronnie James Dio and Black Sabbath isn't Black Sabbath, but we're going to sell it to you as Black Sabbath. To me, it was like, we're Black Sabbath, and now we just switch onto the new Black Sabbath.
You know what this really speaks to? It really speaks to sort of the preposterous attitude that fans take on, that like they own the band's, decision making. You know what I mean? Like, how dare they replace the singer? How dare they do an experimental album with Lou Reed? How dare they do anything but what I expect them to do, So really what it comes down to is just sort of like the arrogance of the fan to think that, you should have it your way every time. This isn't Burger King, dude. You know, like you don't get it your way, man. You get it their way, the way that they want to do it. So
You
that's
know,
all. Good point. Well, we can leave the DO years there and say, all right, we'll agree to disagree on this, but I do see every valid thing. I do recognize everything you're saying is valid, and I get it. You know, I want to keep it the first 6 albums as a holy place in my mind and call it Black Sabbath. And I want to just name that Black Sabbath and nothing else Black Sabbath. I don't want to name Never Say Die and Technical Ecstasy as Black Sabbath. You know,
hey, that's how I feel about Metallica after the Black Album.
Right.
Like I now again, the last 2 albums they've done, I could see cut everything out in the middle and put those after the Black Album, and I would be okay with that. I would be appropriate to me.
I was gonna say Death Magnetic's good, and so is Hardwired. So
Hardwired was even better, I thought. But you know what they realized? They realized, oh, the fans actually want us. They want Metallica.
Yeah.
And what we have is, now I get it, as like late 20s and early 30-year-olds, they were like, we want to stretch our wings and fly. We want to do all these things, but they were doing it at the cost of others. A band who has done this successfully is Tool. They are much different than the band that they started, and but they haven't departed far from where they started to the point where you're I can't listen to this.
Makes the gradual evolution that makes sense, and you're like, oh yeah, I see this. This isn't like,
or another band would be another prog band, but it would be Dream Theater is another band where like their albums they got lighter albums, they've got heavier albums, they have. You know, they change the tone as the years go on, up and down, but overall it's Dream Theater through and through. So let's talk about some things that we do know to be truths. Undeniably, let's talk a little bit of heavy metal history, a little bit of Black Sabbath, our Ken and my favorite Black Sabbath stories. So I'll start out as we mentioned earlier. The key to Black Sabbath's sound is Tony's down-tuned guitar playing. That guitar playing is because of a very unfortunate event in which Tony's going to work. It's his last day. His band's taken off. They're going to go on tour in Europe. He's 17 years old. He's going to quit his job to become a full-time musician. He comes home for lunch. He's talking to his mother. He's like, I'm done with this job. I'm not going back for the afternoon. And as any good mother does, she's like, no, you got to go back and finish the rest of the day out. And then you can be done with the job. And she says, her quote is, Iomis aren't quitters. So Tony goes back to work. He's a welder, and somebody else didn't show up to work. So they put him on some big metal stamping machine, whatever. Yep. Which leads to him getting the tips of his fingers chopped off at work. They can't reattach the fingers. They do the best they can. Then he has to play with these little plastic thimbles he makes out of detergent bottles. He has to buy light strings, which were not common at the time. No one would want to sell him light strings. So he had the ability to bend. But because of that bending and the down tuning to make it easier to play with his fretting fingers, we got the Black Sabbath sound. So the weird part there is that essentially if his mom didn't say Iomis aren't quitters and make him go back for the afternoon, he wouldn't have got his fingers chopped off, and then they wouldn't have had that signature sound. And we might not be sitting here today, Ken, if it wasn't for his mom.
Yeah, I know. I love that story. I love his drive and determination. And that same drive actually shows up later too, when, before Sabbath really got really big successful, they had opened up for Jethro Tull, and Jethro Tull asked Iommi, said, "Hey, our guitarist is leaving. Will you join our band?" And he went to the guys in Sabbath and was like, "Hey, they asked me to join the band." They're like, "Yeah, great, you should do this," because they hadn't really gotten off the ground yet. So he went and he did it. And he played a gig with them, like a big famous gig with other musicians. And didn't really like it, didn't really jive. But what he noticed was they were like, rehearsals at 9 a.m. in the morning, you be here. And he's like, 9 a.m.? What do you mean? We don't even get up until noon. And they're like, rehearsal starts at 9. He shows up there. They were late. They're like, no, dude, you're late. Rehearsal starts at 9, So Iommi sort of learned quickly, this is how professionals work. So he said,
Yeah.
you know what, guys, this is not for me. I want to stick with Sabbath. He goes back to Sabbath and says, look, I want to do this. We're going to launch Sabbath, but we're going to do it with a drive and determination. And we're going to start practicing at 9 a.m. and we're going to do gigs and we're going to write our materials and we're going to rehearse and we're going to do this the right way. And sort of his professional approach, because of all those things that happened to him, is really what sort of kicked it off, and very clearly it was like his mother who sort of instilled that, that philosophy in him. And I think that's a pretty cool story of these guys and the success of the band. And always these things, like you realize you don't really get far in life if you don't have to overcome some obstacle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a really big theme that I think is the truth. And hardship usually leads to, a very good lesson that you learn from that. And hopefully you can apply that in some way.
Yeah. It's like one part luck, one part talent, and one part hard work.
Yep.
And if you have all the hard work, but you have no talent or luck, things might not work out.
Yeah.
In the same way with, like, if you got a lot of luck, but you're not willing to work hard, things are probably going to fall apart at a different stage. So my friend Kevin, when I joined Cost Revelation, there was a lot that those kind of things where I didn't have that exposure. I had more of the DIY aspect of things. You do everything for yourself. You work really hard for your band, but I didn't have that professional aspect. So just working with him, and I'm going to talk about him a little bit later when we talk about seeing some of these final farewell concerts. But I was able to take those skills then and apply them not only to bands, but even my professional life. So there's a lot of lessons that you can learn from people and pass that along.
Perhaps, for sure,
Yeah.
And Sabbath obviously had great success very early on. And as musicians do, they hang with other musicians. So in that circle at that time, Sabbath coming out of England, new sound of the 70s. Zeppelin coming out of England, new sound of the 70s. Sabbath and Zeppelin, you would think, were they rivals? Were they, there's a lot of debate, like, is Zeppelin a metal band? Did they contribute to the heavy metal genre? I think in a lot of ways they did. For some reason, they kind of escaped the heavy metal sound a little bit, maybe because the drumming is a little different, the guitar is a little different, maybe Page's, background in Yardbirds, et cetera, et cetera. But, there was a big, like, hey, John Bonham, Bill Ward drum off kind of thing, and Bill Ward was very much like, dude, we are going to be a heavier band than Led Zeppelin. There's no doubt about it. But Zeppelin and Sabbath were mates, so much so that Bonham was Iommi's best man in Iommi's first wedding. So that's super cool. But, despite that, and Zeppelin wanted Sabbath to sign up on their record label Swan Song. So there was a lot of interaction. But despite all that, they were not on the record label. As far as I can tell, in all of the research that I have done for this, I don't think there has ever been a Sabbath Zeppelin tour. And how cool would that have been to see these two bands together at some point? There is a famous jam session where they jammed together, and apparently somebody has it on tape somewhere. And this took place either during the Volume 4 or Sabotage recording years, where the bands came together and did a little diddly. But tape hasn't been found or pulled out of the archive or wherever safe it's buried in. It has never been played, but Iommi swears it's been recorded. But that would have been a super cool thing to see. I would have loved to have seen, just have a like, what a cool poster would be like, dude, I saw Zeppelin and Sabbath on tour together, but yeah, Iommi hung with cool, famous people. One of his best buddies in the industry is the guitarist of Queen, Brian May. Queen, huge band in the 70s and 80s, huge. So arguably, I think Queen is heavy enough where you could have had a three three bands. You could have gone Queen into Zeppelin into Sabbath. Oh, dude.
Sure.
I mean, like Stone Cold Crazy, you know what I mean? Bohemian Rhapsody. Like there's enough heaviness, you know. We Will Rock You, even like there's enough chunk in Queen to lead into Zeppelin, and there's enough chunk in Zeppelin to end with Sabbath, dude. What a great show that would be to bring your girlfriend and go with your buddy. You know what I mean? You could bring all your friends and have like the best time ever. But Iommi and May are really, really tight. These guys have talked about collaborating at some point. I think they were even going to do it a couple of years ago, but I think both of these guys obviously are getting older, and Iommi had, you know, cancer treatments, things like that. So I don't think it ever really officially launched off the ground, but they're so tight. May introduced Sabbath into the Hall of Fame, the UK Hall of Fame, which was months before they got into the American Hall of Fame, where Lars and Hetfield inducted them, which was like 05, 06-ish.
Yeah.
So I love these stories of like these super, like, you know, just imagine a super group with like Bonham and Brian May and Tony Iommi, you know, or any mix of those bands. Dude.
Just imagine like walking into a pub and they're all like hanging out and trying to fight people. And
right. I
know. Speaking of fighting, when Black Sabbath were recording Paranoid, the recording sessions were pretty quick. It was like 3 or 4 days. But the interesting part about it is that Tony Iommi did these recording sessions with like a big black eye, because a few days before entering the studio, he had gotten in a little fisticuffs. And, you know, it was the days of the mods and the rockers, and Black Sabbath were playing at a seaside resort. Geezer went outside to make a phone call, because that's what you used to have to do, is go out to the phone booth and make a phone call. And he rushes back in and he's like, guys, there's a load of skinheads outside. They're waiting for us to come out. So of course, Black Sabbath in very awesome style are like, all right, we're going out right now. Ozzy grabs a hammer. They get out there. Iommi's like, which one hit you, Geezer? And Geezer points at the guy. Tony immediately punches the guy. Ozzy swings at a guy with the hammer. At the same time, another guy grabs him around the neck. Ozzy swings the hammer back and hits the hammer into the guy's face. And luckily, one of Tony's friends shows up, picks him up. They get in the car. They're chased away with skinheads with bats, and I lost you, Ken.
You're right. I'm so sorry. Does Ozzy strike you as a fighter?
Not really.
Right. I could never really kind of envision him hitting somebody in the head with a hammer, but I guess like when you're young and full of, you know, piss and vinegar, then anything's possible. But when I like sort of read these stories, it's sort of amusing to me to hear that. Apparently, Iommi was like the pugilist out of the bunch, though. Like he was the tough guy in the band, and also like the handsome one. So he got all the chicks, but then he had to do all the fighting too.
Well, I think a lot of that too comes from their like upbringing, living in on the mean streets of Birmingham. Like that was not. It was a pretty rough neighborhood. It seems like kids playing on bomb sites, like from the world wars, and like it was a rough upbringing. And so I think that plays into why they're so willing to fight, you know, get a few drinks in you too. It's just funny because when I tell this story, it is very like autobiographical as well. From my time playing at small clubs and like having situations with skinheads and hammers at venues and fights and people calling people out. Like, it's not funny that it's the similar story, but it's funny because it's Black Sabbath, and you think of like Black Sabbath, this legendary rock band, and then you hear a story like this and you're like, they're just like me. They've had to deal with the same kind of idiots that I did, and they dealt with them the same way that we did. Like it's cool to see that they're human and that they're real people.
Yeah. We've talked about that revolving door of musicians that's played in Sabbath. One of the really interesting lineups that could have happened that didn't happen was right after Ronnie left. So, this goes back to Iommi. He's a famous musician. He's a very accomplished musician. He knows a lot of other very famous and accomplished musicians. So Ronnie leaves, and he reaches out to David Coverdale, then of Deep Purple fame. So apparently there's this huge connection with Deep Purple, like Ian Gillan, who sang for Sabbath on the first album after Dio was Deep Purple. Glenn Hughes, another Deep Purple guy. I don't know what the love triangle that's happening with Deep Purple and Sabbath is all about, quite honestly. But he reaches out to David Coverdale, who I guess had also been singing with Deep Purple. David Coverdale, obviously, who later goes on to Whitesnake fame. But Tony says to David, he's like, look, dude, Ronnie's out. Will you come and audition for Sabbath? And Coverdale's like, dude, I'd love to. But his record label had just approached him. He had just done a solo album that he called White Snake. Not White Snake, the one word that it would eventually become, but White Snake. And the band that was in his solo band then became the band Whitesnake. And the record said, hey, dude, you should start a record. It was called Whitesnake. And he was like, I just committed to this to Whitesnake album, so I can't do it. So you're a pretty big Whitesnake fan, right? Or you were?
I am a huge Whitesnake fan.
What do you think of David Coverdale potentially being
huge,
in Sabbath?
Huge. Well, so I would say I'm glad that I love Deep Purple. Especially I love the Stormbringer era. I love the David Coverdale, Glenn Hughes, Deep Purple, like great stuff. There's just like so much great Genesis that came out of like Ritchie Blackmore too. So you got like Rainbow going on, you've got Deep Purple continuing on. Just a lot of interesting things. Now, personally, I'm an 80s David Coverdale Whitesnake fan, you know, like the 85 album and on. Oh man, like so good. I recently saw them before pandemic hit, playing out here. Still just blazing awesome. He's got Reb Beach on guitar right now. Just awesome.
Sometimes I don't understand you at all, Ryan. But you know what I mean? The only album I had from Whitesnake was Pride, right? That's White Lion.
That's White Lion.
Oh shit! I didn't even have any Whitesnake. Okay, whatever. Fuck. Yeah. See, I don't even know Whitesnake enough to be like
Slide It In, and then the self-titled album. Those are the two albums that you want.
Okay, so could you see Tawny Katane like rolling on the hood of an album cover on Sabbath though, dude?
No. So what I was gonna say is, if this was a good sidestep, because if he hadn't done that, we wouldn't have this amazing 80s Tawny Katane Whitesnake, the MTV Whitesnake that we love, because he would have been preoccupied with filling the shoes of now becoming the starting revolving door, you know, like there's really two versions of Sabbath. There's the Ozzy version, there's the Dio version, and then there's a bunch of random situations.
Guys. So I didn't even know I didn't know the sort of the incestuous Deep Purple relationship. Like it hadn't occurred to me that Ritchie Blackmore also was in Rainbow, where Dio was. I'm like, oh, you know what? Sometimes I don't make all these connections because, I don't care about Ronnie, but whatever. But what's interesting sort of is just how incestuous it was. In fact, when I looked up Glenn Hughes, I didn't realize Glenn Hughes was also a Deep Purple guy. In fact, when I first looked up Glenn Hughes, it came up musician Glenn Hughes as the leather guy in the Village People. I was like, holy shit, the leather guy from the Village People fronted Black Sabbath? I was like, no way. And I'm like, oh wait, no, there's another Glenn Hughes. Oh wait, he was in Deep Purple. Oh, I get it now. So, but that would have been even a funnier thing, I think, if the Village People had crossover with Sabbath,
Well, and Glenn Hughes has been around everywhere. Like he's a big recently he was on my radar because of that metal show. So he was on there. He's been in that band, the Black Country Communion, which is also a reference to Birmingham, England.
Okay.
So there's still a lot of Deep Purple stuff running deep with all
Yeah.
these bands and revival bands of classic rock and such.
Yeah.
And
It just would have been funny if the Village People like were in Sabbath. It would be almost as funny as if like Michael Bolton, joined Black Sabbath.
oh, that'd be hilarious.
Yeah, which apparently was also on the docket. So Michael Bolton, before he's Michael Bolton, apparently did audition for Sabbath after Ronnie James Dio. He sang Heaven and Hell, he sang War Pigs, he sang Neon Nights, and he crushed it. And Iommi really liked him. For whatever reason, they didn't hire him. He eventually becomes Michael Bolton of Michael Bolton fame. But I remember reading this in Iommi's autobiography, and I was like, dude, texting you and being like, what page on the book on the book are you in?
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know, 180 something. I'm like, wait till you hit page 200, man. Fucking mind blown, man. Michael Bolton auditioned for Black Sabbath. Just saying those words for the first time after listening to Sabbath for, the 30 plus years that I've been listening to Sabbath was like something that I never thought I would have uttered. So that was sort of a fun discovery. But I would have loved to hear that. Those pull those tracks out of the archive and release those, please.
Both of those guys, though, Bolton and David Coverdale, I'm sure were just stellar. Sure. would have been equal singers of like that Ronnie James Dio caliber of like being able to like carry a tune and like really, really sing. The funny thing about the Michael Bolton is I remember years ago, the images of Michael Bolton making the rounds of him from his metal days. Like he had the big hair and the whole, 80s thing before he became the 80s Michael Bolton that was the pop singer.
Both of those guys, Coverdale and Bolton, though, are way too pretty to be in Sabbath, though.
That's true.
You can't.
That's true.
You can't sing those songs and be that good looking. It's just not. You can't do it.
Maybe Winger or something. So as with many bands, Black Sabbath were a bunch of pranksters. There's stories of like Ozzy dumping buckets of ice water on Tony Iommi when he's trying to shower and all sorts of shenanigans. But one story that stands out to me is that the boys are coming back from tour in America. They get to Heathrow Airport. They're going through customs. And if you've ever gone through customs, you know how that can be. They, sometimes they're looking through all your stuff, tearing it up. It's probably already stressful when you're a band like Black Sabbath and you're like, I hope I threw everything away before I got here. One of the guys asks Tony, hey, can you take this luggage through for me? And he's like, oh yeah, of course. So do you have anything to declare, sir? No, I don't have anything to declare. They go through his luggage, totally fine. And then they get to this mystery luggage. And as they're going through, they open it up and it's like a bunch of blow up dolls and dildos and handcuffs and sex toys and all sorts of stuff. And of course he already said that, yes, this is my luggage. These are my belongings.
Right.
And now he can't be like, oh yeah, that's not actually mine because that would be illegal. And there's just a bunch of giggles and snickering from behind him.
That's like a classic prank that I'm glad they actually pulled it off. I think it'd be even funnier if you just you don't even respond. You're like, yeah, that's my stuff. Yeah. So yeah, dude, I'm missing my lube. Where's my lube?
That's awesome. I only see the small one. Where's the big one?
Right. Certainly not as exciting as handcuffs and dildos, but also very interesting to me. When you kind of find these things when you read autobiographies that maybe you wouldn't have discovered anyways, but it makes sense when you think about the type of music that they created. But Sabbath was a very spiritual band accused of Satanism, very dark. Apparently, Iommi had the ability, was very sort of paranormal sensitive. He was able to see ghosts. He saw ghosts on more than one occasion. The first times was actually his first wife, Susan, who Bonham was the best man. They moved into a new place in Carlisle in England, and he saw this like apparition in the house. And the house was big enough where they had built a partition, and the in-laws, Susan's parents, were also living in the place. And they're like, "Oh yeah, we saw the ghost too, but it's friendly." So is there a connection to like sort of all of this stuff, like creating the devil's tone in your music unintentionally, being sensitive to seeing ghosts, writing this sort of like dark, quote unquote satanic music, you know what I mean? Is there something that sort of draws you naturally to this kind of like, the darker side of things? I think me naturally, I have a general interest in it naturally. I'm not sensitive to it. Like, I don't see ghosts anywhere. I would love to. I've never seen a UFO. I would love to, poltergeists. I love reading all this kind of stuff. Probably because of my internet history, I don't get ghosts. You know what I mean? They don't want to. They're like, they've seen too much already. They're like, we're not going to show ourselves. That guy's a freak, dude. But I only sees them, and he saw them that when they were recording Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. They were in a castle in England, and he was with one of the other guys from the band. He doesn't remember, it's either Geezer or Ozzy. And there was like a dungeon, and a dungeon in the castle, and they saw like a hooded figure walking into it. So they're like, "Oh, who's that dude?" So they went down to sort of chase after him, and there was nobody there. So again, he's seeing these ghosts or other eyewitnesses to it. It just sort of means that you're sensitive to this third world, which I believe in. I believe in this sort of extra dimension. My mom has claims to have seen, her grandfather's, my great grandfather's ghost, or feel his presence. I've never had that. My mom speaks about sort of guardian angels that have like sort of look over us and protect us. I do believe in that. I had a similar experience. Iommi when he was a teenager. He was driving his car super fast, tires blew out. He flipped the MG, and he was lying there. He says he wasn't intoxicated or stoned or anything, and he said he saw 3 angels that came out and basically convinced them to sort of snap out of it, get out of the car. And he believes that was instrumental in transforming his life and convincing him that he had a purpose, and maybe explains why he had the drive to go on and create heavy metal, So, I mean, seriously, you know what I mean? Like you sort of have these experiences, and it, drives you to, do things, in Amityville Horror circumstance, it drives you to leave the house that you're in, but I think all these kind of things are really interesting to read about. I love them. I'm interested myself. I just have never experienced anything like that. Have you experienced anything like that? You believe in ghosts?
No, I feel like I feel like I believe in like demons and negative spirits and stuff like that. Like I especially like a topic like Black Sabbath is interesting, especially from like the side of being a Christian. Like the weirdest thing is like Christians who want to deny the existence of evil. It's like, no, that's like the devil is equally as important as Jesus is in this whole grand scheme of things.
Right.
So to deny the existence would be to deny Christianity in itself. So I haven't had any experience with ghosts. I love any kind of conspiracy theory when it comes to like aliens. Like I've watched like lots of documentaries. I'm very interested, but until I see something, I have a very hard time believing, even though like, it's like I'm a big X-Files guy. So I want to believe the truth is out there, but like, I haven't seen anything, and I'd be terrified to see something. So if I see an alien, that's going to ruin my life. Well, so I'm a skeptic Even
Yeah.
though I lean more though like to the when it comes to paranormal, it's more about like demons and
Yeah.
spirits than it is about aliens. I feel like aliens maybe would be have presented themselves by now. We would have seen more.
Oh, I don't know, man. I feel like they're here. I feel like they're not showing themselves. I'm a believer,
Probably
but
a reptilian society.
but I do. I'm rooted in science too. I'm like, I need to see the proof. I just think that there are certain people that are in touch with things. The whole Bigfoot hunt with my son was so fun, man. And I'm like, look at these woods around here. There's definitely some creatures living in these woods. I mean, we drove for 200 miles without a cell phone reception in Northern California in 2021. You know what I mean? There's places on this earth where you haven't seen what's there. You know what I mean? In the ocean, in the woods, in very
True.
cold climates, underneath the surface of the planet. There are certainly things, and there are other planes of existence that are absolutely there. And I kind of love that Sabbath explores these in their lyrics. Um, Iommi also said he had the ability to astral project, which is like
Yeah.
the astral body is astral projection is where like you deliberately leave your body, kind of like an out of body experience, except for you're making it happen on purpose. And in this circumstance, you have like an astral body is basically your soul, and you can deliberately leave and sort of float, but it's connected via a silver rope to your body. So you can like sort of tug yourself back down into your body. And he got into this by he was always interested in like what happens when you die and sort of the afterlife. And I think that shows up in a lot of Sabbath's lyrics and interpretations too. So I wonder how much influence, Iommi had on Geezer's lyrics. Because I think that shows up, especially like in Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, like albums like that. There's a lot of reincarnation, interpretation, stuff like that. But he read these books by a guy named Lobsang Rampa, who is an Englishman who had claimed that a Tibetan monk had taken over his body and taught him how to and taught him how to astral project and was living inside him as this Englishman. And he wrote all these books, and supposedly I only read them. And with practice, you get into sort of like this subconscious meditative state. You're not quite sleeping, but you're almost sleeping. You're able to actually leave your body. And he was able to do that on many occasions, and then return. And then at some point he lost the ability to do that and can't do it any longer. But, dude, I think that would be a trip. I think I've sort of been in that meditative zone. I don't meditate, but I do some sleep patterns when I'm an insomniac. So I do this like sleep pattern thing where it's sort of like that. So I kind of think I know where you need to be in order to get to that level, but wouldn't know how to like untap that. But that would be pretty cool. I think that I would like to have an out of body experience,
So I got like
one anyway.
I got lots of thoughts off of this. All right. So
Uh-huh.
first of all, listening to bands that are about aliens is cool. So check out the Faceless, and
Okay.
also check out this band, Blood Incantation,
Okay.
because they have
That's like
really
the most
cool.
impossible logo to read, by the way. Like that's the
What do you mean? It says Blood Incantation. You can't read that.
Right. Thought it was a
The
pile of
art on this
sticks.
shirt though is cool. It's like Saturn, but the rings around Saturn are all human skulls.
Nice.
So check those bands out. Good stuff. The other thought is, if you want to check out some really trippy, cool stuff about astral projection, look into the concept behind the album "Crack the Sky" by Mastodon. It has to do with astral projection. So I won't go into the details of the album, but like check out the concept behind it, pull up the Wikipedia or whatever and
That's cool.
dig into that. And then I've never astral projected. And I don't think this is like a supernatural thing, but like having out of body experiences. I've actually had those professionally, like working with you, actually like doing sales presentations. I feel like anytime we're in like a large group presenting, there's a nervousness to going into the presentation and presenting to the customer.
Okay.
You gotta present all these great concepts and these ideas and whatever. You're not sure how the meeting's going to go. Sometimes these are the first times you're meeting the people. But there's always a point about halfway into the meeting where all of a sudden, like, we're in our flow. Right. Things are going really well. And that's the point where I have the out of body experience where I feel like I'm looking down at the meeting table at all the people and I'm going, we are kicking ass right now. Like, this is great. So it's more of a psychological thing than a supernatural thing because I'm not actually out of my body, but it's that fact that, like, I'm not seeing it from my perspective. I'm seeing it from the perspective of observing the entire room and that the people are engaging and listening to what we're saying and they're involved and things are moving forward. And, but it's like been a very consistent thing in those kind of meetings where, like, again, there's like a level of nervousness. And then once we're in the flow, there's a point where the meeting has switched from like trying to earn the trust and get in there to like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
And,
well,
something that I've always appreciated.
I think you're right. I think there's a psychological trick that you have to do in order to get into any of these states, you know, or you have to have some traumatic experience. So there's a couple, I don't remember the name. There's a pretty cool like series, this documentary series on Netflix called like Embracing Death or Experiencing Death or Encountering Death, something like that. And each one is like a half hour, 45 minutes, and it like takes on a different subject matter. And one of them was like, you know, people who have out of body experiences. And this woman had flipped in a canoe and had drowned, legally drowned. She was like underwater for like, you know, 12 minutes or something like that. And she talks about how her body left and her soul left and she was peering above her own canoe and, you know, sort of had conversations with the universe that her time wasn't up, you know what I mean? And she had things to do and snap back down into her body. And there's sort of this argument about when people see the light when they're dying or they see ghosts or they have, you know, these out of body experiences, are they really experiencing that? Or is it a trick where like in your mind, you're kind of having a communication with yourself. You're on your subconscious level, you know?
Sure.
And you're kind of hallucinating or dreaming this lucid thing, you know, it's this weird state that you're in. Somehow it's all connected. It's all really very fascinating to me. None of that. I don't want to have a traumatic experience to experience it, but you know, I would like
we can arrange that.
I would like to figure it, but I got too much shit going on that I can't like read books on study how to astral project right now, but maybe in my free time I'll do that, you know.
All right. So continuing the conversation and related to what we're discussing right now, there's been a lot of like discussion about Black Sabbath since its inception of like, is this an evil band?
Right.
Is this a satanic band? Right. There's just many instances like Black Sabbath once turned down an invitation to play. Actually, let me reset there. So these conspiracies and these theories about the band kind of start with the first album, where without the band's permission, they print an inverted cross on the liner notes of the album. And Geezer even says that he was so bummed out because he was like, now I have to take my album, which I'm so proud of, home to my parents who are going to be so upset. Right? Mm-hmm. You know, a good Catholic boy, you know, a good Christian boy going home to his Christian family to bring this album. And it has an inverted cross that they didn't want. And so, you know, they were invited to play Walpurgis at Stonehenge and they turned it down. So a sect puts a curse on them. And because of that, they all take it seriously and they all have this dream. They all have their own separate dreams in which they're all wearing crosses to protect themselves from evil. So Ozzy's dad goes and makes these like aluminum crosses for them all. They all start wearing them. They're selling them at the shows to make some extra money. Eventually, their manager buys them gold crosses that are the same size. And these are like giant crosses. And like Tony even talks about like, he doesn't go anywhere without his thimbles for his fingers and his cross, which he said he's gotten hit in the face with multiple times. So the Satanists are disappointed because this evil band isn't actually evil. They don't worship the devil.
Right.
And then the Christians and the religious right are like up in arms because they're Black Sabbath. They're evil. They're coming to take our children away.
Well, I mean, let's go back and sort of analyze why they were dubbed that in the first place. And the reality is like they brought it on themselves, regardless of whether their marketing team put the inverted cross in the gatefold of the album or cover or not, because they decided we're going to call ourselves Black Sabbath. You know, we're going to name ourselves after a horror movie. We're going to write dark, brooding music. We're going to be anti-hippie establishment, and also think about the topics and the lyrics that they were singing at the time. There's no internet in 1969, 1970, so nobody can go and like, you know, print off the lyrics and overanalyze it and build a Tumblr page around it like they do now. You know what I mean? Well, all of a sudden you hear, "My name is Lucifer, please take my hand." You know what I mean? Not realizing the rest of the content of the song, not hearing the other lyrics or, you know, the choruses that come before that particular line, but that's what stands out in that song. And they're like, "Oh shit, they're talking about I'm Satan, I'll take my hand." They're obviously a Satan band, you know, satanic band. That's how all of this starts. They don't downplay it, dude. They're like, "Well, man, controversy is going to sell records, man." You know what I mean? But like you said, it does bring the attention of, you know, Anton LaVey, who's like the head of the Satanic Church in San Francisco, like throws a parade in their honor when they play San Francisco. And they're like, "Oh, geez, thanks. But, you know, we're not interested in all of this." But certainly it contributes to selling records. Certainly, you know, it's going to help you stand out in that, you know, peace, love era. So, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But I mean, that's clearly why they got dubbed that. And their lyrics were controversial, and it touched dark side. But if you go back and you really analyze it, you can certainly see, I think, very obviously that these guys were always, you know, while they were talking about Satan, while they were talking about evil, they were saying these are things in your life that can happen. You should very particularly be aware of them and, you know, not embrace them. Master of Reality very specifically sort of is very lyrically like, "Hey guys, here's what's happening, you know, let's let's like, hey, let's be cool, let's enjoy ourselves." You know what I mean? And that's very prominent in their lyrics. I think if you truly study it and take off like, but people are just reading the top liner, they're like, "Okay, my name is Lucifer, take my hand." And okay, and that's what they've become as a result of it. But
this is the story of my life.
Yeah.
Like as a metalhead, as a hardcore kid, as a horror fan, it's like, so why am I drawn to these things? I'm drawn to these things because like I just said, as a Christian, I believe in their existence. So why is Rosemary's Baby awesome? Why is The Exorcist awesome? Mm-hmm. Why is The Conjuring awesome? Mm-hmm. These things are awesome because I believe them to be true and I'm seeing it play out. And then the same thing with music. You're talking about evil, but you're not talking about evil to be evil. You're talking about evil because you're acknowledging the existence of evil, whether that's a government or that's a demon. You're talking about the realities of the world. And I think as time goes on, like people fall out of religion, like as a society, and they only pick up the pieces of the music that they think they're hearing. Mm-hmm. Where when you go back in time, basically every band was a band of like Christian kids raised from the church. So that's why their content is about like, the best part about going to church is hearing the Old Testament stories of like brutal war and demons and like wizards and like all this stuff that like that the same stuff, the same reasons why I love Ronnie James Dio and his fantasy songs about rainbows and demons and wizards. Like that's the same reason that like as a kid going to Sunday school, I'm excited about that stuff. And that's the same kind of stuff that's inspiring people like Geezer Butler when he's writing lyrics. So they also had an incident where there was a guy on the side of the stage. He had a dagger. He tried to stab Tony Iommi. He puts a cross in blood in the dressing room. Like they had like legitimate threats of fanatics from both
Right.
sides coming
Right.
after them.
Yeah.
So they were legitimately wearing the crosses as a way of protection. Shout out to the Egyptian artist Tariq Abdel Kawi, who did this cool art that has them wearing the crosses. And I think they used this art to do like a cool Black Sabbath bench that they did in Birmingham too.
That's cool. Yeah. But also too, let's not downplay the fact that you have to market yourself, and controversy sells, man. You know what I mean? So, Kiss did it, Motley Crue did it, Sabbath did it. Everybody did it. Venom did it. Is there any band? I mean, I think there was like a Norwegian band that burned a church down or something like that. But like, really, when you look at metal, it's like it's the same. You like metal for the same reason you like wrestling. You know what I mean? It's kind of real. It's kind of fake.
There's only a few of the Norwegian Black Circle bands that are like, we are here to do this for Satan.
Right.
And they actually mean it. But guess what? The guys that they learned it from didn't actually mean it. They just thought it was a big joke.
Right.
And
Right.
Alice Cooper said it best when he's like, the first time I saw these bands, I started laughing. They all looked like me. Like Alice Cooper, another Christian, like, and how many accusations against him for being evil and the devil and all this stuff throughout the years, because he was radical. He was an artist, right?
Yeah.
Artists are often thrown under the wheel of the world for being something counterculture. And counterculture immediately means evil.
Well, and truly that's why I think our artists embrace it too, is because they feel they're not a part of, the generalization, and just because I like to make skulls, it doesn't mean that, I want your skull, although, yeah, I probably do want your skull, but you know what I mean? It's there's this, I don't know, man. I could still cry when I drop my kid off at kindergarten and still, make evil Halloween shit. You know what I mean? It doesn't distract. One doesn't distract from the other, So,
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that just because you have a look or a sound or, that there isn't more under the surface. And I think that's, Sabbath is a really, really, really good example of being able to, create an identity that's totally misconstrued by mainstream, because most of mainstream society does not take the time to fully understand what they're criticizing before they criticize it. They just take it at first glance and they're like, yep, don't like the look of this. This guy's got tattoos on his neck. Don't like the look of him. This guy's got, an inverted cross gatefold in 1970. Don't like the look of this. I'm not going to really find out why. I'm just going to judge and label, and that's the same story in 2021 as it was in 1971. So, but also doesn't mean that you're bad for exploiting the shit out of it either. You know what I mean? I would too. If it was making me money, man, I would ride it as far as I could. So,
so let's talk a little bit about the Black Sabbath, like the final reunions, the final farewells. So again, we talked about the classic lineup. We talked about the Dio lineup. I don't know what year it was that they got back together, maybe 2007 with Ronnie. And I think, honestly, if Ronnie hadn't passed away, this lineup probably would still be together at this point. I think the only reason that they reunited again after that with Ozzy was because Ronnie was dead. And why not do it while
if they were still making new music? I think because you can't really tour.
And I mean, they were re-energized. They were playing amphitheaters. I saw this reunion tour. So at this point, the band's called Heaven and Hell. It's the Black Sabbath with Dio though. And I saw them on the Metal Masters tour, August 19th, 2008, Tinley Park, Illinois, with my friend Kevin, guitarist of Cost Revelation, big metalhead, Dio era Sabbath fan. But this tour was like kick ass. We got Testament, Motorhead, Judas Priest, Heaven and Hell.
Yeah, that's a great lineup right there.
Outdoor amphitheater tour. And what's sad is, two of these bands are gone now.
Yeah.
Like, just really unfortunate. And two legends. And I think I had mentioned this to you the other day. I think that like Dio and Lemmy are two examples of like those like figureheads of the metal scene that like, especially because we've really seen a full history of metal. It started in '68. So, those are people that, are our parents' age or maybe a little older than our parents' age, but they're still live. Metal is a new form of music if you look at the grand scope of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So right now is where we're starting to see the loss of some of these legends, and unfortunately, like stomach cancer for Ronnie, and I don't remember what it was with Lemmy, but he didn't exactly live the cleanest life.
I think he just shut down, man.
Yeah.
I don't know if they divulged it, but it's probably liver related. But I think you started to say, but didn't finish it, that like they both of Lemmy and Ronnie, they became more famous posthumously than they did when they were maybe, or at least recognized and appreciated after death more so than while they were alive. I think that's true for mainstream. I think both of these guys are like icons in the metal world. So,
I think both of them maybe had like that last 3 years of their life was probably the peak where like every festival was acknowledging their greatness.
Right.
Every fan was trying to make it out to see them. Whereas like, I think a lot of people took it for granted that like, oh, Motorhead's out every year. I don't need to see Motorhead. But in those last years, it was like, no, I need to go see Motorhead because this could be wrapping up soon. And even the last ride with Ronnie here, I mean, they had another tour planned, and in the middle of the planning of the tour, all of a sudden Ronnie's in the hospital, and that's it, And I mean, the takeaway there was that he had stomach cancer. It was easily curable. Like this was easily avoidable if it was detected. Instead, he was popping Tums and touring. He was out on stage rocking out because it was more important for him to be on stage than to take care of himself. And because of that, he's now no longer with us.
Yeah, and his wife kind of even said too, like his last message through her was, go to the doctor if you're feeling something.
Yeah.
Don't be a stubborn, tough guy like I was. This was certainly avoidable, but I never saw Heaven and Hell. I saw Dio once live, and honestly, I don't recall who he opened up for. I thought maybe it was Maiden or Anthrax, but I was trying to find the tour and I couldn't find the tour, so it didn't pop up. I thought like it was Faith No More, Dio, and then somebody else, because I came in to see the first band. I think it was Faith No More, because I'm like, oh, I like them, I want to see them, which made me stay for Dio because I didn't listen to Dio at all.
Sure.
And only knew Rainbow in the Dark and Holy Diver. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of people here who are really into Dio. And then whoever the headliner was that I was there to see for. So, I mean, my story, similar to sort of my Priest story, I did not get into Dio at all until my mid-30s. As I said, I was a purist Sabbath guy, but wasn't even into Dio solo. And it wasn't until I moved to California and I met my buddy Yankee Dave, and he said he's a huge Sabbath fan. He was like, don't look at it as a Sabbath album. Listen to Heaven and Hell. Is it a good album with a good singer and a good guitarist? And I said, okay, I'll listen to it like that. And I was like, wow, this is really good. Didn't change my mind about whether it should be named Sabbath or not, but did change my mind that there could be an album without Ozzy called Black Sabbath that was really good. So, but I never saw Heaven and Hell. I never got a chance to, because at that point, this was, 10 years ago. It was getting towards the end of that career in his life anyways. So, but what do you think about the hologram Dio? Like, what's your take on that, man? Are you a fan of that or not?
Well, here's my thought. I wouldn't be a fan if it was just a bunch of random dudes going out.
Okay.
but knowing that the dudes that were in his last touring band were the dudes that were taking him out on tour,
Right.
dude, I would go. It's a gimmick. It's not the real thing, right? But imagine being able to see, like, imagine, well, we'll just say Dio, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to put that on anybody else that's a live musician. But imagine your
Well,
favorite metal
you could
band.
say Tupac if you want, because those were like the two artists that it was
Well,
done
I was
with,
just saying,
right?
like, imagine your favorite metal band that is
Right.
touring. Tomorrow their singer dies. And 20 years from now, you can go to an outdoor venue or an indoor venue and you could relive that band because all the band members are still alive, but the singer is passed. Uh, it'd be cool from a gimmick standpoint. It's one step above going and seeing a live concert in a theater.
I think I'm okay with it, man. You know what I mean? I've never
It's a
seen it.
tribute. It's a
Yeah,
tribute.
I think if the band is comfortable with it, you know what I mean, and they look at it as, hey, we're doing this as a tribute and as retrospective and in honor of him, not as a way to just make money off of this. If that's really the intention of it, and everybody's on board, and like the family and the wife and the kids are all like, yeah, well, let's honor, our brother, our father, our metal god. I don't see any reason why you can't allow technology to let you experience something that you would not have experienced anyway. You know what I mean? So,
Or think about like taking your son.
right, exactly. You're like, hey, Jacob, this was my favorite singer when I was a kid. When I was your age, I saw him do this concert. We'll get to see this concert. This is a very famous show from Madison Square Garden, and you know what I mean, in the 90s. And they're gonna do it again here. That would be I think that's cool. I'd be totally on board with that if it's all done for the right reason, which it probably won't be, let's be honest, but you know what I mean? It's still I don't see anything totally wrong with it. I think, it's just very easy to jump on somebody and figure out like why not to do something rather than why you should.
Yeah, I just think if it's is in the form of a tribute to keep the memory alive
Yeah.
and done in a not stupid way. Like if it
Yeah.
feels like a real show and they've edited it so it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it'd be cool to see like Elvis in Vegas.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, that'd be kind of cool with a
I
live
would love,
band.
dude. I think that'd be great, man. I would love to go see that kind of stuff.
Before we move on, talking about Dio though, I mean like uh I've been a Dio fan for my whole life, like
Mm-hmm.
solo. I think I was saying the other day, like as a kid, you turn on the radio, and I'm a little bit younger than you are. But
Mm-hmm.
so when I turn on the radio, I didn't have like bias against genres as much. Like
Right.
I loved hair metal. I love thrash metal. I love both genres. So it didn't matter if it was Skid Row, if it was Dio, or it was Metallica. I liked what I liked, and I do that today. I like what I
Mm-hmm.
like, and I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
worry about again being like, oh, you're a poser because you like Cinderella. Like, I don't care. I like Cinderella, but so like Dio, been a fan. I saw him early 2000s on the Killing the Dragon tour. Giant dragon banner behind him. I think he opened for Scorpions on that tour,
Mm-hmm.
and it was great. And I'm a big fan of like Dio music outside of like the hit singles that everyone knows. And like I said earlier, I like the dragons and wizards and the fantasy metal aspect of
Right.
it, the Dungeons and
Right.
Dragons metal, if you will.
Right.
Like there's something about growing up in the 80s, like everything had like that fantasy aspect to it, like the Lord of the Rings, the Hobbit, the Dungeons and Dragons, like that's like kind of was ingrained in us as 80s kids.
Mm-hmm.
And even He-Man, right? Like Masters of the Universe said that. So that I always appreciated about Dio and how he always worked like the humming and the lookouts and Rainbow was like in every album, and even he was
Right.
even in the band Rainbow. Like
Right.
um I like making rainbows metal. Like there's something like really cool about that. Like I don't know.
But the farewell tour, I mean, Ozzy's really good at like, what was it like? Retirement sucks tour, coming out of retirement again. Oh, I'm gonna retire finally.
Yeah.
I saw the end, and I'm like, this is the last show in California. So I saw him in San Jose, and then it was like, oh wait, no, they're gonna do the other one in Oakland. I'm like 7 months later, I'm like, okay, so I'll go see the end again. So it's not the end. Now it's the end, you know. Sabbath's really good at that, but whatever. I don't care. You can have a farewell tour and a retirement tour 1,000 times if you want. You know what I
I would
mean?
say Ozzy's on the No More Tours Volume 2 right
Right.
now, which
If
is like
if
on its like
Sabbath
third
ever
or
got
fourth
back
year.
together, I'd be there, you know.
um, actually, we got a listener question here, which is a good point, which is Jesus was ridiculed by mainstream society as well, and John the Baptist too, which is like a good point. Like,
Yeah.
how quickly, especially you think about like the media right now, how quickly are these people to forget about like, I'm sorry, Christians, but you're supposed to be the ridiculed people. Like, you're supposed to be the like counterculture. You're not supposed to be controlling the culture. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But, you know, people forget. So, like, you shouldn't think that because you're a Christian, like, again, as a Christian, I shouldn't think as a Christian that I should run the world. Like, it should be the opposite. I should be the odd man out because that's what the Bible says. So, just go back to that real quick. So I saw I don't know if it was the end tour or if it was the tour right before the end, because there was a bunch of tours. They did the 13 album.
Right.
I also saw this show in Chicago, Tinley Park, Illinois, First Midwest Bank Amphitheater. You know, the one weird thing about this was there was no Bill Ward.
That was a little rough, and I wanted to see Ward too, but you know, at first I thought it was a financial argument thing, and then I think it also might have been a health thing. Bill Ward was pretty heavy at that point too, like it was a physically unable to perform thing. I don't know what the real story is, but my guess it had to be something physically because I can't imagine it would come down to money with these guys, you know.
Yeah, I heard originally it was financial, and it was because it wasn't a four-way split, and Ozzy wanted more money, and
Right.
But then I heard later that it was like, no, he wasn't able to actually play the songs.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't know if that's like a way of saving face, is to be like, well, it's a money thing as opposed to you just can't do it. I mean, I thought it was funny. They've got Tommy Clufetos played drums. So Tommy, he's in Ozzy's solo band. He was in Rob Zombie's band.
Yeah.
What's funny is like when you see him up on stage shirtless with the bandana on his head, he looks like a young Bill Ward. So it's kind of like that weird time traveling.
He hammers the drums a little too much though. Like he's a pounder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He hits the drums where like Bill kind of swings them a little bit. You know what I mean?
That's true.
Like, yeah,
that's true.
So but either way, it would have been great to see Ward, but you know, you got the gist of it. I also, you know, it all blends in together. I saw him a couple times on Ozfest. I saw him twice on the end in San Jose and in Oakland. I believe I saw him before that on a couple years previous, just for like the 13 album. Anytime that I had a chance to see Sabbath, I saw Sabbath. So I just wish I was able to keep all the ticket stubs and could you imagine if you saved every ticket stub from every show you ever been to? Ugh.
You know, I probably have like 90% of them.
Oh God, I've got like maybe 20 total.
They're like all floating around. I was thinking it'd be cool to make like a glass table and just
I don't even have
put
like a third.
there.
Yeah, dude, you got to do something with those. You got to.
It gets harder now with the like digital tickets and stuff like that.
The printouts, like a Ticketmaster 8.5 by 11.
Anytime I can pay the like $3 to have them mail me tickets, I do that just so I have a ticket stub.
Right, I know. That's sort of a dying art.
So let's talk deep cuts.
We touched on this earlier. I chose the National Acrobat because, as I mentioned, there are just some songs, some riffs, some art that grabs you immediately. And this song does it for me every time I hear it. There's something about the tone. There's something about the vibe that just makes an impact for me. It's beautiful. It's dark. Ozzy has a little bit of like an auto tune on his voice. The lyrics are really, you know, deep and complex, and it's and I'm like, what is happening here? And it is immediately like just sends shivers up my spine. There are very few songs that I really think that like impact me the way that this one does for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But it's probably the same tone, that the devil's tone that elicited a response in everybody else, but this is it for me. So probably why I could have even ranked that album higher because of it, but love that song.
So my first deep cut is Under the Sun from Volume 4, which is the last track. It's just doomy, and then the tempo picks up, and it's got the killer progression at the end. It just keeps going, and then there's the soloing over the top. As with most of these deep cuts, just look these up, listen to them, jam them. Right. Like it's really easy to gush about these, but like you just gotta listen, man. You gotta listen to these riffs.
Lord of this World is like, it's the second greatest riff off of that album. Only Into the Void is better, but same thing, moody, groovy, dark, heavy, establishes a sound and a pace and a tone for this album. It's killer. And great lyrics, great talking about the decay of society and, making sure that you caution your perception of the world. I really like it. I love everything about this album. I love everything about this song.
All right. I went really deep. I went with Shadow of the Wind from the Dio Years compilation album. So the significant part about this song is that when they were putting this comp together, they were like, hey, let's get in the studio. Let's do 3 new songs. Which is always a good idea when you do like a comp of old songs, because why as a fan are you going to buy this unless you get an unreleased track or you get something new? Like thinking about like the Alice in Chains box set, that was cool because you got like the unreleased material.
Right.
So this song is great. When they did the 3 songs, they did 3 different tempos. So they did like a slow song, a mid-tempo song, and a fast song.
Okay.
What I like about this is this song is like heavy doom. Like the riffs are really heavy, very signature Iommi. And essentially these 3 songs are what gave birth to the band getting back together.
These are deep cuts for sure for me because I don't listen. I've never heard them. I love the thrill of it all on Sabotage. I love this album. It's so weird. And I love that it's just like, yeah, you know what I mean? And you're like, what? God, Iommi is so good. He's so good. We could, like you said it earlier, every song is a deep cut or no song is a deep cut. You know what I mean? It's just, that's the way that it is. Everything is good in their catalog, in those first 6 albums and then on Heaven and Hell, you know what I mean? Like there are just some albums in this history of this band that you have to just engulf into your, like, you consume the entire thing over and over and over and over. And it's a lot like Tool in the sense where like sometimes maybe you don't get it until you listen to it for like the 100th time.
Yeah.
Sabotage for me, Black Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath for me, those albums take on more layers. When you really appreciate sort of the weird 70s vibe that's happening right there and taking the context of when it was written and taking the, the mood and the atmosphere and the media and the world at that time. That's, killer stuff.
And when you get sick of listening to the albums and songs you've heard so many times is when you find a new album and you're like, it's like listening to an album for the first time, even though it's, so maybe eventually someday you'll get to Technical Ecstasy and that'll be your jam. But you know what I mean? Like
I've given them listens. I've given Never Said I and Technical Ecstasy.
You find something new in old music. And honestly, that's kind of the root of this, my final pick and our final song in the deep cuts. It's not a song. It's actually a double LP that they did. They released Live Evil. So the significance here, and this is a little more autobiographical, but like growing up, I knew that like Dio replaced Ozzy at some point. I also kind of knew that there might have been another singer involved, but I didn't realize there were 15 lineup changes. Like
Right.
I just knew
Right.
there was Ozzy, and then there was like at some point there was this other guy, Ronnie James Dio, who is Dio. Isn't that wild that the Rainbow in the Dark guy was in Black Sabbath? Like that was kind of my knowledge of it. My whole life, I never heard Ronnie James Dio sing an Ozzy song. I only knew him as the guy who sang the Dio era Sabbath songs. So I was like, wow, it would be really great if I could somehow like hear this. So when one day I finally like discovered this album, and I downloaded it, of course. It just really blew my mind because it goes back to that Henry Rollins thing of like, imagine a world where Black Sabbath has a singer who can sing. And that was like what it was like. It's like hearing him sing the classic songs to me was just like really cool. And also it plays back to that thing of like when you heard an album enough, you kind of want something different. Right. So even though these are the songs we know and love, there's a twist on it.
We're going to agree to disagree on this because I agree. Well, I'll agree that I like different twists and I like some of the tribute albums that have come out with other bands playing versions of songs and doing their own takes on them. To me, this is, we don't need to rehash all this. It just feels blasphemous to me. When I hear a classic Ozzy song and I hear a, in the middle of it, I'm like, that's not supposed to be there, dude. You know what I mean? Not when it's the rest of the band and you're calling it Black Sabbath. Like, I get it. He can sing. He can, you know what I mean?
Do you think part of that though is because of your age and the way that you've experienced the band?
100%. And I've come to that sort of realization, during this podcast. It's like how you first consume something and develop your opinion about it. It's very hard to teach an old dog new tricks.
Sure.
I've gone about as far, left with Dio as I can go, which is accepting the fact that Heaven and Hell is a good album and accepting the fact that he was a good singer in Black Sabbath. Will I ever say Black Sabbath is Black Sabbath with Dio? Not to the extent that they were for this with Ozzy. I'll never say it, and to me, if I'm going to listen to a live album of Sabbath songs, preferably I'd rather listen to Speak of the Devil, Ozzy's solo bands covering all Black Sabbath live that was released like within months earlier than this live album in 82 than this version with Dio. So because to me it's Ozzy, and before I knew more about Sabbath, I first associated, like now I would say Sabbath was Iommi's band, right? Previously, when I first became to know Sabbath, I was like, Sabbath is Ozzy's band.
Well, to that point too, I assumed he quit the band. I didn't realize that he got the boot.
Well, I think what's really interesting is about the timing of both of these albums, though, because this came out later in 82. Speak of the Devil came out a few months earlier than 82. In the beginning of the year, Sabbath, the publishing rights to Sabbath ended, which means Black Sabbath contractually, which means Black Sabbath and Ozzy both could release Sabbath material and claim royalties on it. So that's what I think this album is. I think this is an album that said, hey, Ronnie, you're going to sing some old Sabbath tunes and we're all going to collect a paycheck on it. Not because we want you to glorify our old history, but we're like, hey, let's pump out a live Evil album. Let's pump out a live album. Or because wasn't there something about a bootleg live album floating around there or something like that? Or,
yeah. So there's layers to this. So there was a bootleg album that came out and it was like terrible, but like tape trading and bootlegs were really big. So before the internet, now your bootleg would be going on YouTube and watching a live concert.
Right.
So they wanted to get a formal release out that was actually mixed and recorded and like done well. So that's part of it. The second part you have to consider is a lot of bands do this thing where they erase the history or relaunch the history. So they'll record an album with their current singer so that you have a foundation of like why you're singing these songs in concert. So the
We're
interesting
singing these
part
songs
about
in
the Ozzy
concert.
thing is the only reason he released the covers album was because Randy died. And I was watching the 9 Lives of Ozzy documentary, and in it he's really like sad about the fact that they released it at all. Like he's like, I didn't want to release it. It's terrible. Nobody liked it. And I released it because I had no choice. I had no guitarist.
I think you're mixing stuff up because Randy wasn't even on that album. There was 3 songs that Randy recorded live that were supposed to be on the album that ended up being on tribute. Speak of the Devil is Brad Gillis of Night Ranger. So
Yeah.
how I think this story goes is Sabbath was releasing Live Evil. Sharon knew they were releasing a live album. The publishing rights to those songs were released so Ozzy could do it. Sharon went to Ozzy, you're going to do a Sabbath live album with Randy and all the guys. And those guys didn't want to do it because they had released 2 great albums before that, Blizzard of Oz and the other album. And Randy was like, no, we've made our own name with you. We don't need to do Sabbath cover album. They got into a huge fight. Ozzy goes off on a bender, which ends up being the famous peeing on the Alamo incident. Fires Randy from the band, doesn't even realize he's fired Randy from the band. All this is happening because Sharon's like, you're going to pump out an album before Sabbath is so that we're going to all make money off of this. And then Randy dies in an airplane accident 3 weeks after all this, after he agrees that he's going to begrudgingly agrees, okay, I'll do the album with you, record the album, then dies in a plane crash. The 3 songs that they did have recorded with him end up on tribute, and they re-record another song with Brad Gillis from Night Ranger. The rest of the album.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say, though, is that Speak of the Devil was released because he lost his lead guitarist. So
Speak of the Devil was supposed to have the lead guitarist, was supposed to have Randy on it.
Yeah, but what I mean is that I'm just saying what Ozzy said in the documentary was like, I had no choice but to release covers because my band was in the toilet because my guitarist died.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then Sharon's side of the story is we had no idea that they were releasing a live album at the exact same time. So it was very embarrassing that we both released a live album. Ozzy's trying to be like a level above Black Sabbath. Like he's on his own. He's doing this. He doesn't need them. He didn't want to rehash his past career because he could have done another Diary of a Madman, you know, like
Madman, that's what I was trying to think of. Yeah.
So anyways, I love
that, right?
I love the album. I've got it on vinyl. This is one of those like throw it on while you're working because it's a double album. It's really long. Live music's always good when you're like working on a project, like just to have on in the background. It's kind of cool to intertwine because I couldn't go see, especially at that time, I couldn't go see Dio performing these songs. So this was my like holy grail of like being able to hear all this performed, intermixed. Now he's doing Iron Man. Like it's just, it's kind of like a fantasy album, like where you're like, this would never happen, but it did. Yeah. All right. Enough on deep cuts. Let's talk about tributes. Let's talk about like tribute albums first.
Yeah, there are 2 albums that came out in the 90s called Nativity in Black, which was the incorrect assumption that NIB, that's what it was called, Nativity in Black. Actually, NIB is just nib because the point of a pen is called a nib in England, and that's what Bill Ward's beard looked like, and that was the working name of that song. But they named it Nativity Black. This came out, I think, in 94. This was in heavy rotation for me in college. There are great cover versions on this. Rob Zombie does a version of Children of the Grave. Al Jorgensen fronted 10,000 Homo DJs. They do Supernaut. Sepultura does Symptoms of the Universe. There's, Megadeth's on here. Bruce Dickinson is on here. You name it. Typo Negative does a killer Black Sabbath Black Sabbath cover.
Oh, it's so heavy.
Great
So heavy.
tribute album, and all of them are really sort of unique interpretations of the songs. Some are okay, some are awesome.
I will add that Ministry did Supernaut on their tour on the Slayer's final tour, which was just awesome, just so heavy. And then Corrosion and Conformity's cover of Lord of this World is awesome as well.
Yeah, there's a second volume too that's got some winners on it too. Soulfly's on it. System of a Down does a great Snowblind's killer.
The NIB that Primus does on volume 2, for some reason that got a lot of radio play, and I just remember thinking like, what a perfect band to cover NIB. Like it's a bass driven song. You got Les Claypool on it. It was just cool.
Yeah.
Another tribute that everyone knows about is obviously Pantera's cover of Planet Caravan, which was on Far Beyond Driven. It was supposed to be on a tribute album, and there was some like label politics, and they weren't able to release it. So they were like, what the heck? We'll throw it on our album. Phil has said, like, it's funny because you think Pantera, they're going to cover the heaviest heaviest Black Sabbath song, and instead they cover one of like the lightest,
and it almost sounds like an exact replication of it. Also, it's like, I mean, they didn't do anything to change it up. It's like almost the exact same sound.
Well, and it's almost like when you listen to the album, you almost think it almost sounds like it's a Pantera song.
Right. Yeah.
Like it just like it vibes so well with the rest of the album.
Yep.
Faith No More's War Pigs. I mean, we all know that one, and what a great jam. I know there's a live version on the Nativity in Black. Faith No More does great cover selections. Like,
I mean, talk about a guy who can sing Sabbath. You know, Mike Patton is probably, I think, in the top 5 best like metal vocalists of all time. You know, he should be considered. He's up there.
Oh, phenomenal.
You know.
And then so there's 2 aspects of tribute. There's the aspect of like cover songs, bands we know covering Sabbath, whatever. And then there's bands who commit their entire craft to tributes. I feel like in every American city, there's got to be a Black Sabbath, Into the Void, War Pigs. I don't know. There's creative names out there, but
in the 90s, when I was in Jersey, I grew up in Jersey. I didn't think Sabbath was ever going to tour again. So there was a local Sabbath band called Sabracadabra, and the dude was like an Ozzy impersonator. He was a little chunky, so he was like the fat Ozzy version in the 80s. But Jesus, he looked just like him and sounded just like him. And the guitarist looked and sounded just like Tony Iommi. And these guys were phenomenal. And I would drag all of my friends, whether they were Sabbath fans or not, to go to like some weird bar in like Jersey somewhere to go see Sabracadabra. And it was phenomenal. I love tribute bands. I love really good tribute bands. I Googled them. They have a website. It looks like they're still cranking things out, 20 years later. So kudos to Sabracadabra of New Jersey, Black Sabbath tribute fame. If you're listening, thanks for bridging the gap before I could see Sabbath live. And I'll also give a shout out to Black Sabbath, the all-female Black Sabbath tribute band based out of LA, who plays a lot here in NorCal too. I just love people who are committed to that, keeping that dream alive and that sound alive, because like Motorhead's gone, at some point Sabbath's going to be, forever gone. There's always the tease that you'll see Ozzy might tour again and still do Sabbath. There's still incantations out there. The guys are still alive, but Dio's gone, so if it's a hologram, it's a hologram. If it's somebody who sounds like it, I'm into it, man. I'm all for the local tribute bands, I think, and I'll go and make a great night at the bar with it anytime.
I'm not familiar with any like tribute bands per se in the New England area. But coming from Milwaukee, shout out to Thrasher. Andrew Balistreri, Bill House, these guys, phenomenal singer, phenomenal guitarist. The whole band is awesome. They do all metal covers. So everything from Maiden to Priest to Metallica.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The set list is different every time. And like, there's like cover bands and you're like, oh, that's cool. And then there's cover bands where like you would pay just to go see just that cover band.
Dude, there's an 80s cover band in San Francisco called Tainted Love. They're phenomenal. They do like New Year's Eve shows where it's like a huge venue and it's a $50 ticket to get in. And it's very clearly their career, So good cover bands, man, that's a fun time.
Cover bands make so much money.
Dude.
Speaking from a band who made originals, the cover bands will get so much cash, and then and sometimes those bands are not that good. But
right, of course.
Let's talk about bands who are doing this on more of a national or global level.
Mm-hmm.
There's a band called Brownout, and they have an album called Brownout Presents Brown Sabbath. So this is members of Grupo Fantasma. They're a American Latin funk band from Austin, Texas. And this is like their Sabbath side project. And you can see there's like a ton of dudes in this band, but there's nothing like their style of music. I've never heard metal played in this style because it's like that Latin funk.
I don't know how you heard of them, but I'm glad you turned me on to them because it is a great interpretation of Sabbath. I would love to like see these guys live on a Saturday night with my buddies, like go out. That would be like that would be such a great weekend. Like, oh, what'd you do? I saw this band called Brown Sabbath reinvent Sabbath tunes. And I don't know how you found them, but I'm glad you introduced me to them. I love that they do a lot of instrumental stuff too. Not all of it's with lyrics, but some of them, whatever path they choose to walk down, the introduction of the horn section, they do. I don't know, man. I'm a big fan of it. I'm glad you showed me the way with these guys.
One of the parody tribute bands out there that's pretty big is called Black Sabbath. And they've even like Ozzy's seen them. Like they're pretty big. They're a mashup of like McDonald's, Ronald McDonald Band, and Black Sabbath. I mean, the vocalist is Ronald Osborne. You have the guitarist Slayer McCheese, the bassist Grimulus, and the drummer the Cat Burglar, who it looks like a cross between the Hamburglar and Peter Criss.
Right, totally.
So I was fortunate enough to see these cats play. They were on tour with Galactic Empire, which is the Star Wars themed metal band.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
I've only seen videos of YouTube. I know Robbie's seen them. You've seen them. Is it awesome because it's just funny gimmick? Or is it awesome because it's actually pretty awesome?
So Galactic Empire is awesome because of the music. Like the music is like really heavy. It's like djent metal and stuff, and the visuals are cool. They're all in costume.
Mm-hmm.
Black Sabbath is more of like a psychedelic experience where like you're not on drugs, but you feel like you are because the singer is god awful. Like he's not really like Ozzy. He's like a worse version of Ozzy. Right. And like, I have no clue what the lyrics are, but it sounds like Black Sabbath, but it looks like this like bad McDonald's acid trip of heavy metal. Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
To put it in terms that might make sense, I'm not going to throw Black Sabbath on to listen to. I'm going to throw Galactic Empire on to listen to.
All right. Okay.
But Black Sabbath, I would see both of these bands live, but like just when you get to the Black Sabbath part, just be prepared. It's out of this world.
Yeah.
And then the last band to talk about, and this is probably like the legacy of keeping Black Sabbath alive for the foreseeable future, is Zach Sabbath.
Zach Sabbath.
So this is Zach Wild. He's the lead guitarist in Ozzy's band. He does guitar and vocal double duty, and it's perfect.
Yeah.
You got Blasco on bass. He's the bassist from Ozzy and Rob Zombie before that. Ozzy has a habit of stealing Rob Zombie's musicians for his solo band.
Mm-hmm.
And then the drummer is the legendary Joey Castillo from Wasted Youth. He was in Danzig and he was in Queens of the Stone Age for a really long time. So it's a trio and they jam.
And I mean, literally, who better to carry the Sabbath torch than Zakk Wylde? I mean, with his history with Ozzy, his history, you know, as an ambassador of metal, you know, plus just the alliteration, Black Sabbath. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. So
it would be like if the guitarist of Motorhead carried on Motorhead, you know.
Yeah.
There's nobody really appropriate to do it unless they're somehow connected to the band on a very high level. That makes sense.
Speaking of like if anybody was ever gonna join Pantera, it would be, I'd say Zakk Wylde could like take over for Dime. You know, I would have been on board with that.
I put Zakk in the world of guitarists. He's one of the living legends, right? Like Slash is up there, Zack's up there. There's just like certain guitarists that are for sure their sound is definitely their own and no one can match that sound.
Right. But also they are the embodiment of metal. Like you don't question that Zakk Wylde is a lifer. You know what I mean? Like this dude breathes Texas. Oh, look at that. We got an old friend.
Give a shout out to Aaron in Texas.
What's up, Aaron? Is Brown Sabbath from Texas? Is Brown out from Texas? Is that why she's saying that, or is she just saying?
Yeah, Austin.
Texas? Okay, there you go.
Austin, Texas, American funk.
Yeah. So, anyway, Zakk Sabbath, I'm in, man. Go for it.
Yeah, Zakk Sabbath. I mean, even the promotion for the tour was in honor of and celebration of 50 years of Doom.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what they are. They are the torchbearers, the tribute. As long as Zakk is leading the band, it makes sense. And this will be the opportunity for Jacob to see Sabbath at a level, right? Like in 10 years from now, this is the way to see it in a pure form. So I think Zakk is the legacy moving forward. I mean, the guys are still hanging on. They're still like, the band has wrapped up. They wrapped up their final tours. Ozzy's finishing his final tours. There's potential that they could do a reunion. And if they do, we'll be covering it for the podcast. But what do you think is the legacy of Black Sabbath now?
Well, I mean, the legacy. I mean, you kicked off the podcast. You're like, there would be no podcast probably if there was no Black Sabbath. There would be no heavy metal if there would be no Black Sabbath. Every single heavy metal musician says the same thing. What are your influences? Black Sabbath. Those first 6 albums, Heaven and Hell. They're like, dude, that's the legacy. And then I mentioned it earlier. To me, you know, of all of the bands that I have listened to in my life that have shaped who I've become and are the soundtrack of my adolescence and my early adulthood and now my later adulthood, you know, all those big influential bands, Sabbath is the one for me that still fires me up. You know, that's the legacy. Like, there is such a unique something, you know what I mean? The presence that they carried then, you know, and then in the 80s and in the 90s and in the aughts and the reunion and then the death of Ronnie and then, you know what I mean? Their Sabbath is like literally transcending time. That's their legacy, man. You're going to put on Black Sabbath, or Master Reality in 2040 and 2050, and you're like, this is a great album. That's their legacy, you know. And every single musician that has a down-tuned guitar is going to be looking at Sabbath and thanking them for that. So, what can we say more that literally every musician on earth can't say better than us, you know? So it's that's their legacy. And and that's why I was like, okay, Jacob, what are you wearing to school today? which shirt you want to wear? I'm like, Black Sabbath or the Mandalorian, because either of those is acceptable. You know what I mean? He chose Mandalorian. Okay. So you wear Sabbath tomorrow. Second day in kindergarten. That's Sabbath's legacy, dude. I'm putting shirts on my 5-year-old kid in their first day or second day of school. You know, that's their legacy.
I'm a proud uncle.
I know it brings a tear to my eye too, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo what you're saying. I mean, what can be said that hasn't been said in the last 3 hours and 20 minutes that we've been talking on this show, man? Like, we have a lot to thank them for. Heavy metal riffs. This is a lifestyle that has been given to us because of this band. Now, if it wasn't for them, maybe it would be somebody else, but you can't say that because it was them. They were there first. Right. They were the ones who did it.
Right.
I think of the bands that we wouldn't have without Sabbath. I mean, like the standouts are bands like Iron Maiden, Metallica, Megadeth, Pantera, Lamb of God, and then there's the those bands that are like heavily influenced by the stoner genre, the Caiuses, Queens of the Stone Age, Fu Manchu, Sleep, High on Fire, The Sword, Monster Magnet, Mastodon, Mojave Lords. The list goes on and on and on. And I mean, I could just open the page 1, letter A of bands that rock, and you know they're all influenced by Black Sabbath. And you summed it up the best when you're talking about picking out the t-shirts and whatnot with your son. This music lives forever.
Right.
What can't be said about a lot of bands is that a band like Black Sabbath can be passed down generation to generation and have an equal impact.
Right.
So certain bands, it's just not going to resonate the same way. But a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old hearing Iron Man for the first time isn't going to have the same reaction jumping up and down that you did when you heard it for the first time when you were a kid.
It's awesome. It's fun. And I guess, you know, I was mentioned many times, I love to see my son relive my passions, you know. Maybe that's just, you know, too egotistical on my part, but I love to see him love the things that I love, you know, and music's so important to me that I hope it becomes as important to him.
And because of that, we thank you, Black Sabbath.
We thank you, Black Sabbath.
All right, it's time for our final segment of the podcast, The Firing Squad. In this segment, I will be asking our guests 10 quick fire questions. Ken hasn't seen this list of questions prior to me asking them, so his answers should be quick and simple with no explanation.
Yeah, they're definitely quick and simple.
Needed. It's been a little while, so I hope that you're on your toes. I hope you've sharpened your nib and you're ready for this action.
I'm very excited. I love these things. In fact, I think that the next time I should reverse this and give you 10 quick fire questions.
I'm in.
All right. I've started to formulate.
I'm already sweating. I'm already stressed. I like to be on
formulate them already.
I like to be on this side of it. But yeah. All right, Ken, are you ready?
All right. I am ready. Let's do it, dude.
Number 1. Favorite Metallica cover from Garage Days?
Well, jeez.
You get bonus points if you sing it.
Jeez. I love Crash Course in Brain Surgery, but I love Last Caress, Green Hell too, man. But I'm gonna go with Last Caress. I got something to say. Actually, it's Green Hell. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go with that. Green Hell.
That's a good example of like sharing with future fans your inspirations.
Yeah.
Okay, number 2, your favorite Oreo flavor that isn't like just plain Oreos.
Ooh, you know, I don't think that I've gone. Okay, it's Oreo like. Trader Joe's has a Oreo knockoff called JoJo's. It's the only one that I ever really tried any other versions, because when it comes to Oreos, I just buy the fucking regular Oreos. But JoJo's has a pumpkin spice one that's pretty good. Otherwise, I'm just gonna go sort of like the half and half. There's like a chocolate vanilla one, I think. For Oreos, I gotta go classic.
You should. Your
I'm a purist
assignment,
Sabbath fan, and I'm a purist Oreo fan.
your
Right?
assignment between now and next episode is to try like a flavor that's not plain Oreos.
You're so disappointed in me, dude. It's an Oreo, dude. No, you're like, I'm gonna go to JoJo's from Trader Joe's, and you're like, blasphemy. Settle down over there, man.
All right, number 3. The X-Men, the Avengers, or the Justice League.
I want to go the X-Men on that one.
All right, I like that. I'm looking forward to them doing the X-Men right. Like, I don't feel like they've done a good like X-Men.
It needs to be rebought. Are they gonna cross over those universes though? Are they gonna redo Avengers and redo X-Men?
I think they should just scrap all previous X-Men and just start fresh with the Marvel universe.
Well, I think are they doing Wolverine versus Hulk? Are they doing that? I thought I saw something about that.
That'd be a good way to intro it.
That would be a real good way to intro it. I'll tell you.
I hope you shave this and then you audition for.
Agreed, don't you think? You know, just a little HGH. I could be Wolverine, man. Come on, let's do it, dude. You know.
All right, number 4. You've got a pocket full of quarters. What's the first game you're playing when you walk into the arcade?
Oh, Karate Champ, dude. That's.
That's deep. All right, cool. Yeah. I'm not disappointed in that answer. I actually I think that's pretty cool.
All right.
Okay, number 5. Your favorite member of Rush.
Oh God. I mean, I'm gonna butcher this one because I'm not a prog rocker, but I'll go. I'm gonna go Getty on that one, I think.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6. What was the last new restaurant you tried? Like whether you went there or just takeout, and would you go back to this said restaurant?
Yeah. We went to this. I don't know if it was called the Lobster Shack or something like that. There's like a lobster. There's a
Red Lobster.
Well, no, but you know what's funny is I did take Tiff to a Red Lobster on Mother's Day like 5 years ago as like a joke. I'm like, hey, let's go check out Red Lobster because I'd never been to one.
Dude, I love Red Lobster.
I love what you expect. I liked their. Did they give you like biscuits or
the biscuits?
The biscuits were pretty good. Anyways, there's a Lobster Shack. That's not what it's called, but it's called something like that out here. And supposedly they're flying in the lobster from Maine. And it was pretty decent. But they love to charge you $20 for a lobster roll here in California, dub it like a New England style lobster, New England style lobster roll, and charge you $20. And they don't even like fill the hot dog bun, which is kind of what they're supposed to put them on. Like my uncle, he lives in Maine. I grew up going to Maine, like literally pulling off the side of the road and getting a fresh lobster roll, lobster, butter, and just like a hot dog bun. Like that's kind of what it was. That's the way to eat it. And they were crammed with lobster, not this $20 bullshit I got here in California. So, but I would go back, even though it's too expensive, it was good. Agreed. Crystal agrees. Them biscuits.
Yeah, and I can back that. When we were watching the Bucks in the finals, there's a box mix of the Red Lobster biscuits. You can get that at the store.
Oh God.
So check that out.
All right.
Also, living in New England, we were just up in Portland and we just got some dope red lobster rolls. We went to a place called High Roller.
Mm-hmm.
It was like an hour wait or something. So we like had to put our name in and leave and then come back. But like, holy crap. Great.
You got to do it just
rolls.
simple. Like it's just lobster and butter. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It was drawn butter and lobster. I like them warm. I like the warm ones.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, fantastic. All right, cool. Number 7, the favorite new band that you have discovered.
Oh, geez.
And don't say Dio fronted Black Sabbath.
I don't know, man. There's probably not a whole lot of that right now. The first one that comes to mind that I'm like, oh, they're kind of good, I like a little bit of that alien weaponry stuff. There's some young kids from New Zealand that are cranking out
Yeah,
some
dude.
tunes. I like them. That's like new. I have a hard time saying like listening to new stuff. I still listen to the same damn first 6 Sabbath albums. You know what I mean? So, but I'm gonna give Alien Weaponry a shout out. I did see him in concert right before the pandemic hit. Young kids crushing it, super tight, great
So
sound,
good.
great riffs, man. So shout out to those guys.
Yeah, they to me are like years ago I discovered Gojira, and
Right.
I feel like they're like the next in that line
Yeah.
of bands.
They got some skill
Um
for some young kids, man. They got some chops and they got some good riffs.
yeah, I the two other bands that I've been jamming lately is a band called Stalker.
Oh.
It's got umlauts over the A, like really cool like uh Hell Awaits style Slayer kind of stuff. Like it's
Good.
got that great falsetto metal singing.
Mhm.
And then a band called Drain, and they're like California based. They're kind of like a power trip
Mhm. Mhm.
kind of a thing vibe. So it's like thrash, but it's also like the music is kind of inspired by the whole California surfing sharks
Okay.
kind of vibe to it. So it's got
Drain.
a Cali vibe to the
Drain and
thrash metal.
Stalker. All right, I'm on it.
All right, better franchise, Rocky or Rambo?
Rocky.
Yeah, I would agree. Number 9, favorite after school cartoon growing up.
Mm. Mm, 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 mm. Probably G.I. Joe.
G.I. Joe. All right, number 10, final question.
Mhm.
Would you go to space if you knew that you could never come back to Earth?
How old am I? When? I mean, that would depend on the circumstance. Absolutely, I would if it was at like if I had a terminal illness, it was the end of my life. I was in like my 80s. Today, right now, no, I wouldn't because I have my family. So, you know, you can't just
You've changed.
that one's not too cut and dry. If I have this, the answer would be no because of my family. Absolutely not. But yes, sure, that's the way I want to go out, man. Blast me off into space, into Bezos's giant dildo, dude, and let's blow up together first. Great, I'm in. Yeah. How do
On
you?
that note,
What do you think of these? When you lie in bed at night and you're like, dude, what can I ask these firing squad questions? I'm scraping the barrel, man.
all right, Ken. Before we get out of here, where
Yeah.
can people find Sculpable? What's the current status?
Yeah, I am pleased to announce that I have officially launched Sculpable as e-commerce. Sculpable.com is now officially live. SKULLPABLE.com. The Etsy page is no longer in existence for some legal reasons, potentially, but I'm ramping up production right now, anticipating Christmas. My goal is to have 150 skulls ready for paint before Labor Day. And then I'm going to mass produce a bunch of local stuff, for Niners, Raiders, and, the popular teams. And then I'll be taking custom orders as needed. And Tiff and I are hitting the holiday circuit this year. She's going to be selling her jewelry and her resin art. And I'm going to be crushing skulls right next to her, dude, bringing the metal, bringing the pain.
I'd love to do a con with you, but I don't know logistically how we get like either all the toys somewhere or all of the skulls somewhere. But I've got so much stuff to sell.
We'll definitely figure that out, man, because
speaking of stuff to sell, collectanddestroy.com, official Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's all Collect X Destroy. Shop.collectxdestroy.com is the official web store, so you can buy toys and all sorts of collectibles, all sorts of fun stuff for all ages. Enter the code podcast15. Again, that's podcast15 for 15% off your order instantly on all orders.
Awesome.
Remember, this episode was streamed live on YouTube for 3.5 hours. You can find the audio only version on all podcast audio services starting next Monday. So jump online, anything you like, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, at Pocket Cast, Overcast, any free podcast service, you can get this. Slap that subscribe button, whether you're on YouTube or you're on the podcast sites. But Ken, sincerely, thank you so much for broing out, nerding out.
We can go on and on and on and on. But when it's Sabbath, it's forever. That was awesome, man. I feel like, this huge weight's been lifted off my chest. Next week, podcast Sabbath Part 2, where we talk about everything we didn't talk about. Fuck, dude, that was killer, man. I love this, dude. That was a lot of fun. Good luck with the move, brother.
Thank you.
I'm sure we'll be talking during all that stuff, but looking forward to seeing the new studio and doing the next broadcast from whatever that Baxter Palooza is going to look like over there.
Yeah, I know that we'll be talking Ghostbusters sometime around the release of the new film, whether we'll either be getting our thoughts of the new movie and talking about it, or we'll be recording it right before to get everybody ramped up. So make sure between now and whenever that movie is that you watch Ghostbusters 1 and 2 so that you can catch up with Ken and I. Everyone stay safe out there, and we'll catch you soon enough from the new Collect and Destroy Studios.
Later, brother.